Hey, so in this video, this very long, I almost just want to call it a podcast at this point. It was a discussion. So it's a discussion with Obsessive Hermit. So he is a YouTuber or a newly established video essayist. His first video got my attention, and it's a critique of Final Fantasy VII and its ending. So it's basically a discussion between me and him. He is very critical of the ending and the decisions of the directors in where they seem to be taking Remake. On the other hand, I'm very excited about that direction. So we're basically kind of on two opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of our interest in the ending of 7 Remake. I loved it. He hated it. That's kind of like a simplified way to look at it, but at the end of the day, we both actually end up agreeing a lot. So yeah, that's just a little bit of context about what this episode is about. The first 20 minutes or so, though, is more or less an interview, and the rest of it is actually going into is more of like the debate. I wouldn't even call it a debate. It was really more of a discussion. We actually ended up agreeing on a lot of things, but I think at the end of the day, we both enjoyed the game. But yeah, we'll get more into it in the discussion. So without further ado, here's the video. Into this. So the impetus for this discussion was in reaction to your video. When endings break stories, a critique of Final Fantasy VII Remake. So I guess a little bit of background about me is I'm in my mid 30s, so I grew up with all these games. I played Final Fantasy 7, played 10, 12, 13, skip 15. And then it's like coming back to 7 Remake, and I've always, for me, like I told you earlier, I guess how we talk back and forth in the DMs. For me, Final Fantasy has always been more of like a visual experience, a gameplay experience, a musical experience, and for me, story it's always been there. But for me, the story was more of like escapism a little bit. It was not. I never. I If you think about it, Kingdom Hearts, yeah, that doesn't make like the story doesn't make any sense. I think we can both agree mostly if you think about it too hard, even with 10, I would say, even with Final Fantasy 10, if you think about it too hard, it kind of doesn't make any sense. But for me, that's just where I'm coming from personally. So that's just kind of my credentials in terms of talking about Final Fantasy stuff. I've been around for a while. I'm a big anime fan. I follow Japanese media. I've been following it since like the late 90s. So yeah, that's my context for this discussion. So I enjoyed Final Fantasy VII Remake for multiple reasons that we'll get into. So when I saw your video, um, so just for context, I've been watching a lot of critique videos about this over the last 4 years, and yours was the first that was the most nuanced take, I would say. The best, I guess, both sides kind of like not completely trashing the game, but also giving a reasoned critique with like detailed examples and like good reasoning why you think what you think. I think what I find with a lot of these discussions is, especially online, it's very tempting to just go like, this game is complete trash, and it's like, and there's not a lot
Yeah.
of like talk in the middle. So that's kind of why I wanted to talk to you and why I really found your video really well done and interesting.
Well, thank you. I'm very flattered to hear that. Thank you. So where do you want to start on that then?
Maybe if you can just do a quick, because I'm gonna point people to your video. I want people to go watch your video and like get the full context. But just for people who just want like the quick TLDR, how would you describe your critique of Final Fantasy VII before we get into like the finer points of the video?
Okay, well, maybe it's best if I give a little background as to how I came to the Final Fantasy series. I got into Final Fantasy back in like 2013 or 14, so this was only like 10 years ago. I like back in high school, my friends and I used to watch a lot of those top five like those top 5 videos by Zoom In Games. You know that channel?
Top five. No, no.
Okay,
What?
they used to be like one of those top 5 lists. They were kind of like a Watch Mojo at the time, sort of.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so I kind of watched all their videos because occasionally you saw something cool like top 5 evil villains. You see some of the cool villains like Makarov from Modern Warfare or Ares from God of War, so on.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, they did a video top 5 brunettes in gaming, and naturally they showed Tifa at one point, and like I was 15 at the time. That was love at first sight for my hormone fueled brain.
Of
So
course.
naturally, I looked up Advent Children, watched it, or at least I watched some scenes from it, and I tried to watch the movie, but I couldn't understand it. So I had to go back and play the game. It was a bit of a tough hurdle because I was one of those guys who was never turn-based combat would have been a tough sell for me. But that being said, I did finally get into it and I absolutely loved it. And it's one of my favorite games of all time now. So 2 years after that, when the remake finally came out, I was really ecstatic. Just a moment, my earbud keeps
Yeah. No.
popping out.
Yeah. Don't worry. No
Yeah,
worries.
I had to drill little holes in here and fit the
Yeah.
earbuds through there.
Do you
Yeah.
mind if at some point we talk about your cosplay a little bit, because I do interview cosplayers as well. I actually have 2 interviews I'm still editing actually in the moment. So I think at the end, maybe if we have a little bit of time, I'd love to talk about like this whole, because I've gone to conventions.
Okay.
I don't think I've seen many Shishios, and I've seen some
Uh,
Kenshins, but even
uh,
Kenshin is too old for a lot of people.
okay. Actually, here I'll just finish up discussing my background, and maybe we'll kind of discuss the cosplay, like just get it out of the way because it's kind of like an elephant in the room right now. Like,
Sure, sure,
uh,
sure.
yeah. So, yeah, I played the original game, loved it. So, when the remake was finally announced at E3 2015, I was really ecstatic and excited. And when part one, I was totally fine with the fact that they were splitting it out as a trilogy. I was fine with that because, like, it meant more content. It meant they could flesh it out more. They wouldn't have to condense anything, like how the Harry Potter movies had to cut a lot of stuff out of the books to make them fit together. They wouldn't have to do that, I figured. So when remake part one finally came out, I loved it, but like a lot of people, I was really let down by the ending because I felt that there were many problems with its execution, and I felt that it kind of broke the story, like the narrative and the tension and the drama. And we'll get into why that is. And so, as I saw people arguing about this online, I felt like why does nobody else see what I'm seeing? Like, so I figured people are arguing about the merits of the changes, like relative to the original game, but I wanted to focus on it specifically from a storytelling perspective. And I figured I didn't play the original game back in '97, so I'm not like an old school fan. But I'm not really new to Final Fantasy either, and I didn't I've disliked a lot of the more recent games, like the 13 trilogy, and I never got into Kingdom Hearts. In fact, I might upset a few Kingdom Heart fans when I say this.
Uh,
I tried playing Cage back. People loved it. I read up on the story on the first game and Chain of Memories so I could understand it. I didn't see what all the fame was about. I didn't enjoy it. I was bored.
mm,
I think the biggest problem is that like at least on normal mode, it doesn't do a good enough job of incentivizing you to mix up your strategy. You can get through most of the game by just jumping and spamming the attack button, at least on normal difficulty. It takes less skill to beat it than it does to enjoy it, and I think that's a major design flaw then. And I couldn't figure out how the drive system worked. I used it once when it turned on automatically, but I could not figure out how to turn it on again because there was like the text box just said use the drive system when the bar is full. And I looked
mm.
down at the controller with all its button combinations and I'm just thinking, use it, huh? Like, great advice. Have you guys ever tried writing a bomb defusal manual? Step one, use your hands. Like,
Yeah, it's been a while for me so I played it as a child, so for me it's Disney plus Final Fantasy. It's like it was like I remember when it was first announced. Like I was like I think I was like 10 years old when they first announced it. I don't even know how back then. I don't even know how I heard about it. I barely had access to the internet. It was probably through some like Game Informer magazine. But yeah, it was just the idea. So yeah, I can almost understand. Like, if I try to go back and play it now, I probably might have the same critiques. Honestly,
yeah.
yeah, and
Sorry, yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I kind of digressed there for a moment. But back to the topic. So yeah, since I saw people arguing about Remake, and I felt like no one was really conveying what I was expressing, and I wanted to try and be a voice of reason, because I was really angry at first, but my views calmed down over time, and that's part of the reason why my video took so long to make. I had to keep rewriting and cutting things to make it more nuanced and more succinct. So yeah, I decided, you know what, I got to make a video getting my thoughts out there. And on YouTube, you either go big or you go home, because YouTube's algorithms are designed to promote videos that get lots of watch time. So you have to make it look good and professional, and it needs to be long to get the attention. So I figured, let's just do one huge video. And yeah.
Okay. Can I quickly let me just ask about the video making process at least, because yeah, I looked at it, I was like, man, this must have taken like just not even just on the script writing. I mean, just seeing the research you went into. I'm like, wow. I like you said, it took 3 years to that the script writing alone, but I'm talking about like the editing, the B-roll, the adding in the music. Like, how long did all that take?
Uh, I wasn't keeping track of the hours, but it was probably thousands. The thing that took the most amount of time was the recording process, because it took me a while to figure out my voice. So there were many times where I recorded something, I edited it, but then when I watched it again a few months later, I was like, you know what, it doesn't sound good as I thought it did. It sounds too monotone, or the quality is sucky, so I got to retry it. So that was the thing that took the longest. And also, I had my microphone that I used was a really high quality one, not this one that I have pinned to my chest right now. It was like, my dad does music. He writes his own songs. So
Oh,
he let me use one of his really good quality microphones for recording. But with quality comes a lot of imperfections that get picked up on the mic. So I had to go in and manually cut out the clicking sounds that you get from the compression, like saliva smacking in the mouth. I had to go in and manually cut those out of every take that I used. It took an extremely long time.
wow.
And then I had to, now I used a filter to de-ess everything, so to reduce the sibilance. So that was nice. But yeah, and also literally every single sentence in that entire 3-hour video is comprised of at least 2 or 3 takes cut up and stitched together. There's not a single sentence that runs like in one continuous take. It's all multiple takes cut together to get the intonation absolutely perfect.
Oh wow, that is okay. Yeah, I mean, I figured it was a lot of hours, but that is yeah, that is a lot of work.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, if I ever decide to make another video again, I need to find ways of expediting the process, like
yeah,
a more efficient way of working.
gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, I don't have any tips on that. I'm pretty new to making content myself, actually. So
Yeah.
I'm more of just like a. I wish I had more time to, like, put into the editing. I use a lot of like kind of AI tools. I use CapCut for editing, and it just kind of there's like an AI button like, hey, take out all the pauses and all the awkward silences, and it just like
Yeah.
does it. And I'm just like, at this point, at this point in my life, that's good enough. Otherwise, I would never post. I would never be able to post anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? You know what? If I do make another video, I'll have to reach out to, and I have to ask you how to do that, because like that would really help.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think yeah, it's yeah, we can talk later about it. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we got an idea of who we are, who each of us is.
Oh, we were going to briefly mention the
Oh
cosplay
yes,
thing.
the cosplay.
Yeah.
Let's get into that. So let's start off with why. Why she? I mean, any people, content creators, everyone. Some people just decide to show their face. Some people, for their own reasons, they don't want to show their face. You've gone a direction I've never. I don't. I've in the anime kind of gaming space. I'm not trying to shoot gas up your asshole or anything or whatever. I'm being honest. Like, I've been watching content creators for a long time. The closest I think I've seen is like a VTuber, but I've never seen in person cosplay as kind of like what would you describe your content? I mean, I think you've made one big long video, so I would say I would call you like a vlog, like a video essayist in the
Yeah.
like anime
Yeah.
gaming space. Yeah.
Yeah. Video essayist is the best term I think we can go with. Yeah, the main reason I went with the costume, like, first of all, I've enjoyed making costumes since I was a kid, mainly for Halloween. In my video at 2 points, I showed footage of me at a dance party in a xenomorph costume that I made.
Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
remember that? Like, I made that costume. The tail was a swimming pool noodle. I used a lot of rubber tubing and black duct tape holding the whole thing together. The head was a bicycle helmet with chicken wire to create the shape and Bristol board to create the texture on top.
Okay.
Yeah, it was and also jeans and a shirt with a lot of tubing hot glued onto it and painted. So I've enjoyed making costumes. And ever since I saw the Rurouni Kenshin movies, I've seen a few episodes of the anime, and I love the OVA Trust and Betrayal with focusing on his backstory with Tomoe. I think that's absolutely fantastic. It's beautifully done. Um, was it? But yeah, I like the live action movies, and I love how Shishio was portrayed in them.
Mm.
And I figured, you know what? If I'm going to do another Halloween costume, like this is a character I have to dress as. He has such a cool design, and I love him as a villain. I find that social Darwinists, like the strong survive, the weak die, I think they make for good villains. And part of the reason for that is because often when they're defeated, they say, well, you've proved my point. The strongest survive. I suppose you, the hero, are the strongest. I must accept defeat. Yeah, it,
Yeah.
yeah, they make for good villains. And also, I've been self-teaching Japanese for a few years. I'm nowhere near fluent, but I can recite many of Shishio's lines from the movies. As is, I can give you a few if you like.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it. Um I'm actually working on an app will allow me to watch anime and then be taught Japanese as I'm watching the anime.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I'm totally there with you, like trying to self teach Japanese. So go ahead, please.
yeah. In Kyoto Inferno, when we're first introduced to Shishio, like he speaks to Saito, like, "Do you believe in hell? Surely a world this awashed in blood deserves a name like hell." Like he says, like, "Omae wa jigoku shinjiru ka? Shura ga gomeku gensa koso jigoku ni fusawashi to omowane ka?" Like, I love him. The things he says. Or how about when Kenshin asks, "Is this revenge for what the government did to you?" And Shishio says, like, "Ima soru fukushu nante Q&A, mushiro kansha shiteiru kurai da. Kono kizu wa ironna koto o iru no shiete kureta. Shinjiraru ba ragiri, uran suru ba korosaru. Korosaru mae ni, yare. Tsuyokereba iki, yowakereba shinu. Tanjun meikai na shinjitsu da."
Oh,
We'll have to add, yeah, we'll have to add subtitles over
no, no,
top of that. Yeah.
sure, no, yeah, yeah, yeah. I was actually kind of thinking about that. I was actually thinking about just pulling up like the clips side by side and just having you like one like reciting it and then like yeah, but we'll see,
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah.
Okay, wow.
Wait, one more thing. So yeah, so I've loved costume making for a long time,
Hmm.
and I figured that in order for my video to have like a really real quality to it, I have to speak to the camera at some points, kind of like Angry Joe does. But I don't want my face to appear online because we live in an age of targeted advertising, deep fakes, AI, surveillance, so on. So I needed to find a way where people could see my face and like they could see my expressions and relate to me, but also keep my face hidden. And it just so happens that wait, this costume's perfect for that.
Hmm.
So yeah, that worked.
Yeah, it's a happy coincidence, I guess, for you.
Yeah.
I guess for me personally, I'm at this point in my life where I don't care. I have little. I guess I kind of work for myself. So I if I was still working for someone, I would actually be more on your side, like not showing my face and stuff. But now I'm at the point where I can like I feel like I can say whatever I want. I just kind of but that's me. I'm a little bit older. I think I'm like in my mid 30s. I'm guessing you're a lot younger or younger than
Uh,
me. Yeah.
I'm 26.
Okay. You're yeah. Okay. Yeah. Kind of like Gen Z. Is that what we
Yeah,
say?
I'm Gen Z. I was born in '98.
Okay.
So
Okay. All
yeah.
right.
Although that being said, I grew up in a bit of a bit more of a conservative area. Like politically, I'm very moderate. I'm a mixed bag. You can't
Mm.
really classify me anywhere. So I didn't really grow up in the city. So in some ways, I'm actually, in terms of like lifestyle and so on, I'm still kind of millennial, sort of.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. So old, you feel you're like an older Gen Z, I would say.
kind of. Yeah,
Okay, yeah, yeah. You don't come off as like the stereotype for sure. I would say
yeah,
just
yeah,
the the very young. Yeah, we won't get into that.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Best we don't, because that rabbit hole never ends.
oh
So,
yeah, yeah. Let's. Okay, all right, cool, cool. So we got. So I guess one more while we're on like the cosplay kind of. So how long would you say you've been like an anime fan? I mean, how'd you get? Yeah, how long you been watching anime for? Like, and have you
actually,
gone to any conventions and cosplay?
Uh, I've been to EGLX, which is a convention in Toronto.
Okay.
Like it's a gaming convention, not as Shishio. Once without a cosplay, that was my first time there. And then the next year, this was before COVID hit. It hasn't been running since COVID. Um, the second time I went dressed as Arden Azunia from Final Fantasy 15. Love his
Okay.
character. My mother helped me make the coat and everything, so that was a lot of fun. So yeah, and to be honest, I wouldn't call myself a huge anime fan because the anime that I like are few and far between. They're hard to find. I love Death Note, and
Hmm.
I enjoyed the first season of Attack on Titan. I
Okay.
found that the show has gotten too bleak as it's gone on. Things just get worse and worse, and humans spend more time fighting themselves than the actual Titans. And if you're in a world where every character is an asshole to each other, it's just like, who do you root for? And
Oh,
no one is my take.
okay.
Yeah. And I do like again some of Rurouni Kenshin, and right now I'm actually watching a series called Moribito, Guardian of the Spirit.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, actually, I got it right here. Give me a sec.
Sure, sure, sure.
Yeah, yeah, it's right here.
Oh, DVD. As
Yeah,
seen on Adult Swim.
yeah,
Did
yeah.
you grow up with Adult Swim in where you're oh you're Toronto, I'm guessing Canada. I've seen your
Yeah.
posts, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
when I was young, the only thing I really watched on Adult Swim was Robot Chicken, really, like during my teen years. But
Okay,
that being
yeah.
said, I've yeah, Moribito is pretty good. I have a few issues with it, but I am enjoying it thus far.
Okay.
It's pretty cool. Yeah.
All right, cool, cool, cool. Yeah. Yeah, I grew up with like Adult Swim and like
Mhm.
that was like the beginning of my anime journey. You wake up, you're like 10 years old, and you turn on Cartoon Network like late at night, and you're like Cowboy Bebop, people shooting blood coming out. You're like, what the
Yeah.
hell is this? Yeah. So,
Yeah, yeah. I love Death Note. Cowboy Bebop is another show I've been meaning to get to at some point. Um,
oh, okay,
y-
okay, okay.
yeah, I've been meaning to get to it because I hear that it's fantastic. And I also saw the first season of Psycho Pass.
Mm,
I thought that was pretty cool. It was a kind of derivative of Minority Report, but I did find it like enjoyable, and I did like its world building. So yeah.
gotcha. If you've never just, and this will be the last like anime kind of thing. If you ever have time, if you ever get a chance, I would definitely check out Samurai Champloo if you're like a Kenshin
Oh
fan.
yeah.
It's got this mix of like music, but it's still got like samurais and it's got kind of an interesting storyline as well. And it's from the same guy who created Cowboy Bebop, and people love it. People like
Cool.
I loved it. I've told people like younger people who didn't grow up with it to watch, and they love it. So I think you'd probably enjoy it. But that's just
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll have to check it out then. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Alrighty. Let's just start the discussion then.
Yes.
Let me pull up my notes. Okay. I'm just gonna go straight because we've already kind of talked about why I enjoyed Seven Remake, why like my perspective on Final Fantasy.
Hmm.
It's a little bit different than yours, I think. I think you're more of like you're very plot driven. The plot is very important. For me, it's like it's kind of important. Like it's
Yeah.
not the only thing. I the
Well.
totality of like what Final Fantasy is to me is more than the plot. But
Yeah.
that's not saying there's like a
Yeah.
wrong or right. Like I
Uh,
yeah.
well, if I can weigh in, for me, it's not necessarily just the plot. I mean, depending on how you define it, because the plot is like the succession of events, like characters move from point A to point B to point C. For me, it's not necessarily even just the plot. It's rather like the overall experience. I mean, this is part of the reason why I like Final Fantasy 15, despite its flaws. 15 has massive flaws from like a structural perspective. But that being said, I still enjoy it because it managed to make me care about its characters and it managed to keep me immersed in its world despite some contrivances that like this felt a little stupid at times.
Okay.
But yeah, so it's the experience that's greater than the sum of its part. That's how I evaluate media. But the issue I have with Remake is the fact that while most of the game was fantastic, and there are a lot of issues with like the structure of the ending, the biggest issue is that the ending, I feel, very abruptly adds a whole lot of new things that I think compromise the world and therefore the conflict. Because that's the thing I want most. I want to become immersed in the world and conflict, but the ending adds a whole bunch of things that just made me go, how am I supposed to feel grounded and root for anything now? Like, we'll get into why that is.
Okay,
And
sure. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. We will as we go through the timestamps. We will get there. We'll get there. Okay. I'm just gonna start with the. Okay, so we talked about brief intro, summary, and okay. So we'll just go to the first. I guess my first. I guess this is like a timestamp, so this will be like a key for people to go watch the video. So
yeah.
at about 32 minutes, um, there's like a discussion about. Let me read this again.
I
Discussion.
think it's the part on fan expectations, right?
Discussion on FF7 remake suggesting negativity from a minority. Hold on, let me just read the full my notes. I argue that majority. Sorry, I wrote this like a week ago.
That's all right. I
Yeah,
wrote my notes a week ago too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Arguing, suggesting. Oh yes. This is okay. So yeah, okay. So I think at this point, um, so I think a lot of people, I guess, agree. So I guess before I guess make it. So did you overall did you enjoy Final Fantasy VII remake
Yes,
in the totality?
on my first playthrough, yes, but I found it like really difficult to enjoy again on my second
Gotcha.
playthrough,
Okay.
knowing the context of the ending. That's my answer. Yeah.
Okay, so basically it was basically all good. It was all good up until chapter 18, maybe even 17.
Basically, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. Okay, fair enough, fair enough. Okay, so I would think that there is a little bit of like a meme right now out there that it's either 7 remake is like, it was great, people played it and enjoyed it. I've actually seen a lot of like new fans come into the game just because of, 7 remake and what it like kind of like the word that it was like really good. But I
Hmm.
think there's like this weird, I would say weird counter narrative I've noticed ever since like I would say I noticed it in 2020. So the game came out in 2020. I noticed in like 2021, there would be like videos where people would be arguing that it's actually like terrible. And I would just scratch my head and I'm like I can understand like, people hated like the last chapter, right? Like I can
Yeah.
almost I was when that last chapter came up to me, I was like, "What is this Kingdom Hearts?" For me, it was fine because I was like, "This is awesome! I get to fight Sephiroth." And I'm kind of interested to see where they're gonna go with it. So that's my take. But there's like this weird thing that is like because of chapter 18, the entire game there's like this push to say the entire game is bad. Like, oh, I've
Yeah.
heard people say they didn't enjoy the battle system, they didn't enjoy the story, they didn't enjoy like I've heard some people, I guess there was like textures, like background textures. I mean, I don't know. For me, I grew up in the PS2 era, so I'm kind of like, yeah,
Same,
yeah.
same. And by the way, I'm used to playing games like on shitty PCs with the graphics turned down.
Mm,
And I actually played a lot of Wii games growing up. So yeah, I'm used to like weaker visuals. The textures, like the door and the matte paintings, those were the least of my concerns with Remake.
okay.
I didn't care about those. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's I guess that's where I'm coming with like with this point, this first point when I was watching the video. That was the first thing that came out to me is that I noticed that I think there is like this weird meme of like you'll just see like all most of the hate videos seem like it's like they hate the entire game and it's down to like the ending and the fact that Nomura is kind of attached to it because of Kingdom Hearts. And
Yeah.
I understand, like, I don't enjoy the stories, like the whole the Kingdom Hearts friendship, light, hope. It's so vague. It doesn't make sense to me. But I personally enjoyed the gameplay.
Yeah.
I could say probably if I came back to it now after playing like harder games, it wouldn't stand up to the test of time for me. But I think their core audience was mostly kids, honestly. So
Yeah.
that could be part of why this. I don't know, but yeah, I think it's kind of a meme that. So what would you say to that? What would you say to like it being
Uh,
like it's not? A lot of people are pretending to hate the game, but it's not as bad as people are saying it is.
uh, well, I just want to briefly touch on like one thing. Like I have 2 points to make here, and the first one's the shorter one. You mentioned that a lot of people hate on Nomura, and that's true. I tried like to not really mention him much in the video because, to be honest, I don't know how much of it is his fault. I'm not very familiar with Kingdom Hearts. I don't know how much of it can be blamed on him. And in fact, if anything, FF7 Remake, like the ending, has more in common with the 13 trilogy by Toriyama than like Nomura. Like Nomura's mostly just the visual side of
Yeah.
things, like the fact that the Whisper Harbinger looks like a Heartless. That's
Hmm.
pretty much it. Like in terms of like concept and like the new story elements they added, that doesn't feel so much to like Nomura to me as it feels more like Toriyama plus Nojima. But I
Hmm.
don't want to blame everyone because game development is a collaborative. Well, I don't want to blame one person because game development is a collaborative decision. So I tried not to blame Nomura. It's just in general, I'm not a big fan of the way that Creative Business Unit 1 writes stories, and especially not sequels. We'll get into that in a moment. Like they're not good at writing sequels, and I'll explain why that is.
Okay.
Um, but as for the part about like people disliking Remake, saying it's terrible, like I don't think the game is terrible. I think for like most of the game is extremely well designed and structured. Um, what was it? The like the combat is great. I loved the combat on my first and even my second playthrough. The presentation's good. The visuals are all pretty outstanding. I love the music. Like even though I haven't played the game in years, I still listen to the music a lot when I'm just washing dishes or when I'm driving my car to my dad's place, for instance. So yeah, I love a lot of things about the game. The problem that I have with Remake is that for people like me who dislike the game, the problem is that there are certain things that we look for in storytelling, and certain tropes can be huge deal breakers for us. Like if you add this particular trope into a story, it totally breaks it for us, deals off, we don't like the work. The problem with Remake is that it holds all of the potential deal breakers until the very end. And so if you play through the game first without knowing about the ending, you love it all the way through, but then you get to the ending and you realize that it has these elements that you dislike. It just cripples the experience. Like all the hard work that the developers put into it, all the parts that you love, now it's all for naught because the whole thing is hampered down by these elements that you didn't realize were there. Like, know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, so can you? I guess can you? So I mean, this is getting into one of. I guess it's the time travel, the time
Yeah.
travel element being in. So what is? Yeah. So let's just get to that. Like, what is it about the time travel? Like, I watched the video. Like, I watched it twice.
Mhm.
I watched
Yeah.
it on 2 times speed, obviously. You know, for I was like, you know, I need to get I need to get all the points, but watching it twice, 6 hours. That's a quite a commitment. So I watched it twice, and I still wasn't really convinced about why the time travel element is such a bad. Like I know it's overused in our current cinema. You know, Avengers being actually post Endgame Avengers being the biggest, I guess,
Yeah.
sinners, the most prominent sinners in this regard, right?
Yeah.
Everything's like multi-dimensional. Though there are some like, so my pushback is there are ways to do it well. I
Yes, of
think
course.
I watched Everything Everywhere All at Once. I don't know if you watched that film.
I love that movie. I think it's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's ways to handle multi-dimensionality, these kind of like, I don't know, very abstract concepts that we don't have good explanations for, even with like physics.
Yeah,
And so I think there's a way to deal with it. I guess I have more faith that maybe they might not
yeah,
make the sins of the past. So I didn't play 13.2 or 13.3 because I had
yeah.
experience with 10.2 that I was just like, I don't generally trust sequels of Final Fantasy games. The mainline games
That's
are
well, then
usually
that's the yeah, well, that's the same issue with Remake. Remake is a time travel sequel to like the original, or at least many people speculate that it is. It's not entirely clear yet. We'll have to wait till Rebirth confirms that.
yeah.
But a lot of people, yeah. Sorry, I cut you off. Continue what you're saying.
No, no. I guess I think time travel can be handled well. Like I
Yeah.
think I subscribe to like Max's. I don't know if you Maximilian dude.
Hmm.
Personally, you can have your opinions about him. That's fine.
Yeah,
But
that's fine.
personally, I I subscribe. I think I watched his like I think it was like Easy Allies. They did like a 2 hour just like
Yeah,
after.
I saw that.
Yeah,
I saw that.
okay, good. Okay,
Yeah.
so we you kind of know where I'm going with this.
Oh no. Oh yeah. Max's theories are definitely the most prominent in the fandom. When the game came out, like people who love the game were telling all the critics to check it out in the hopes that it would work. But the thing is that like, and this isn't a knock against Maximilian, dude. He's a fine guy. He enjoys theory crafting. If you love theory crafting, all the more power to you. And again, he's a good guy. I don't hold any grudge against him or anything. But for people like me, the problem isn't that the puzzle pieces don't fit together. The problem is that we don't really like the picture that it creates, and that is that time travel in Final Fantasy VII just it's a really difficult sell for people like me. And the reason why is because the issue with time travel is the same problem that I have with resurrection and alternate universes. If they're done well, they can be done well. But the problem is when you add them to a franchise that has already existed for a long time without them. So the Final Fantasy VII sub-series, like people say that, well, Final Fantasy I and Final Fantasy VIII had time travel. What's the big deal? Just because time travel is in some Final Fantasy games doesn't mean that it can work in any Final Fantasy game, especially not a sub-series that's already existed for a long time without it. And that's the thing. The reason why time travel is such a huge issue for viewers like me is because it destroys our trust in the writer. Like, because the thing is, when a franchise has already gone a long time without time travel or resurrection and alternate universes, but then it adds those things in later, usually what that indicates is that the writer is trying to contrive a way out of a corner they've written themselves into. Like, I don't like how the story ended in the last installment, so I'll just fix it with time travel. Or, like, I have to write a sequel because my publisher wants me to, but I killed off all the characters in the last installment. How do I continue the story? Well, I'll just resurrect them so I can kill them off again. Or
Hmm.
if your story is too complicated, like too much shit has happened and there's too much backstory, fine. We'll just jump into an alternate universe and begin anew from there. So that's the thing. Travel and resurrection theory, we're far more accepting of those things if they're a key part of your story right from the very beginning. Because if you establish them in the first installment of your franchise, usually that means that the writer actually has a very good reason for including them. But when they're only added to a franchise that's gone on for a long time without them, that means that the writer feels that they're stuck and that this is the only solution. So, in a lot of ways, the problems with time travel are they're only a problem if you let them be. If you are insecure enough in the story that you're working with that you feel the only solution is to reset everything by bringing people back from the dead or jumping into alternate universes, you've already lost, really. Like, you see what I'm getting at here?
Uh, I mean, so you don't think there's any because I hear what you're saying. I'm just not. I see why it's kind of like a dog whistle or like a signal that it's weak. Like like there's been a lot of bad implementations of time
Yeah.
travel, so you can say it's like a cheap shortcut for like story writers who may or may not have an answer to some of the I don't know plot holes or like things that they want to explore in their story.
Yeah, yeah, because that's the thing that I have with Remake. Remake feels as though the writers feel like they're trying to contrive a way out of a corner. It feels like the writers sat down at some point and said, "Shit, we got to remake Final Fantasy VII," but at the same time, we have all this compilation stuff that we have to work into it.
Yeah.
But a lot of people hate the compilation. A lot of people like it. What do we do? And they're just like, you know what? Fuck it. Let's just use time travel and reset the timeline and see if we can begin anew from there and tie it together. And it's just like, dude, if that just makes the issue even worse. If you feel that everything is a mess, just have it set in a different continuity. And I don't mean an alternate universe, just pretend that it's a self-contained separate continuity that is separate from the original game and compilations continuity. You can tie the elements together. You can try and retell the original game's story while having compilation elements, but trying to tie it all together with a multiverse and time travel, like that just creates so many plot holes. And not only that, but it actually kills a lot of players' trust in the narrative, because why get invested in anything if we suspect that the writer will just reset everything again? I mean, nothing can stop a publisher from milking a franchise for all it's worth. Let's say 10 years from now, when the remake trilogy is finished and like Nomura and Nojima and Katase have all retired, Square Enix could just get a new team and reset the timeline again and put out another sequel trilogy, and then they can reset it again and again and again. This is the problem with comic books. Comic books, by their very nature, are not allowed to end. The serialized format means that the publishers will hand the writing duties off from one author to the next. So every time a story arc ends and a new one begins, everything has to reset with a multiverse or whatever, because because one writer's decision to kill off characters can leave the next writer without any resources to draw from.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I don't read American comic books, honestly.
Yeah,
That's why I'm more of a. I love a
yeah.
story as I get some sunlight. Give me a second. I'm gonna readjust my curtains. So yeah, what was I saying? I was saying
We were talking about comic books and why you don't read them because of the time travel, like the fact that nothing is permanent in them.
yeah. I mean also it's just like I like the fact that a story ends like you've got like Full Metal. I don't know how if you've seen Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, Death Note, like those.
Yeah.
It's like there's a beginning and then there's an end, and
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
done.
In,
There's
fa- in fact, and yeah, I agree. Stories need to end at some point because, I mean, think about it. Storytelling in a lot of ways is joke telling. You plan out the punchline, the ending in advance, and the whole story is building up to it. Like if you ever like, that's how all jokes work. It's how you create a satisfying ending. Um, but if but that means that the story has to end at some point. If you try to keep milking it forever, then that's not really even a story. That's a setting, really. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but then see here, this is where I start to defend Final Fantasy VII Remake and like the
Right.
entire what the project is, because to
Mhm.
me, so I believe the writers, Nomura, the other guys, I should probably know their names by now, but I don't. I've
Nojima,
Najima.
Toriyama, and
Yeah,
Katase.
I've heard at Kitase. I think I've heard an interview. I'll try to find it and like link it somewhere where one of the reasons why they decided to do the remake now, besides the fans, because honestly I don't think they they really care about the fans that too much. Even though I love remake, I think the creators that they don't actually care that much. I think it's more of like a project, a passion project for them. I think they've
Yeah.
always wanted to end, like put a button on Final Fantasy VII forever and just like end it. So that's why I think this whole like Sephiroth is like a time traveling demon. I think that's cool. I think it's like an interesting way to like just like put a kind of close out the compilation and just kind of put an end to like Final Fantasy 7 forever. It kind of like for me, I grew up with Evangelion. I saw the whole 20-year journey of the regular anime to like the end of Evangelion to like 10 or 15 years later you get the rebuild series. And I think that's kind of what's happening with the remake. It's more of like a way for these guys who've been working in the industry for like 20 plus 30 years. They're going to be retiring pretty soon. So I think they've always wanted to do this, and I think this is this time, maybe it's not the best way, but I think it's an interesting way to like, okay, Sephiroth is, we need to kill Sephiroth once and for all. It kind of explains why he's like in Cloud's head all the time. He's somewhere in the
Hmm.
live stream, and it's like this weird, like, I
Yeah,
subscribe to the Max's explanation. He can explain it way better than I can,
yeah,
and I find that compelling enough for me. And I don't see a problem with the time traveling aspect, though
yeah.
I can concede that it is it's usually not handled well. And in your video, you even talk about I've seen it myself as well. I didn't have to play 13.3 or 2 to know this is not worth my time.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why I'm so skeptical, because Toriyama is heavily involved in Remake, and frankly, there's no hope for someone who is foolish enough to think that if you change the future, you change the past is an acceptable thing to write down on paper. Like
Yeah.
yeah, so that's part of the that's a major concern that I have there. I see a lot of 13.2's awful time travel shenanigans in like the ending of Remake. Now
Mm.
that being said, as I address in the video, and this is where I actually do agree with you, theoretically they could pull this off, but the way that they need to do it is they need to reestablish limits for how the time travel can and will be used. I addressed this towards the end of my video to those who haven't seen it yet. The best way that I think they can actually make this remake trilogy work, the way that they can tie it all together, is by making Genova the source of all this. Because Genova is an interdimensional being. It's plausible that Genova could do this time travel thing. So what they need to do is they need to establish that the whispers and all these things, they only exist because Genova tainted the life stream with her powers. And this is what allows Sephiroth to go back in time. It's the reason why Sephiroth came back from the dead in Advent Children. And it could also explain why the Whispers were able to resurrect Barrett after he got killed in Chapter 17. And they need to establish that destroying Genova will destroy these elements altogether. So if they finally defeat Genova at the end of Part 3 and purge her, like they annihilate her completely, and then all her magic and powers are gone, that would definitively establish that the timeline can never be reset ever again, and no one can ever be brought back from the dead. If that, like, it's all over, everything is now permanent because Genova, the source of all the omnitemporal stuff, is gone forever. If that's how they wrap this up, I think I'll be okay with that. I think that's a good way they could tie it all together. The reason why I'm so skeptical is because Remake hasn't really established that that's what they're doing. It doesn't feel like there's any limits on what time travel or the life stream can do. It feels like the writers are using the life stream as a cop out to do whatever they want without explaining it. Like Barrett gets stabbed, but the whispers bring him back from the dead because the life stream moves in mysterious ways, or Sephiroth traveled back in time because the life stream moves in mysterious ways. It's the same problem with the Force in the Star Wars sequel trilogy, how they used it as a cop out to do everything, like healing fatal injuries, communicating and teleporting things across the galaxy. It's, you know what I mean?
Flying princess. Oh, what was? Oh my god, why am I? Honey buns. What's her name? God damn it, on her head. Layla. Sorry, Layla flying through space with no
Yep.
yeah,
Mom, yeah. Mom and I watched The Last Jedi. We agree that that scene was really stupid. But we jokingly call her Carrie Poppins.
oh man, R.I.P. R.I.P. R.I.P.
Yeah. Carrie
Yeah,
Fisher, like
yeah,
she was great. No disrespect to her.
yeah.
That scene wasn't her fault. That was the writing. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that was actually even after her death. So I'm not even sure she was. Oh, I think maybe she recorded. I don't know. I'm not really sure.
Well,
Yeah.
she died in the post production of
Okay.
The Last Jedi. So
Okay.
this would have been after filming. So
Okay. Okay. So she was actually because I know there was a few scenes where it was like they CG'd, like they did some like CG, like it wasn't actually her. They did some CG magic.
that was mostly in The Rise of Skywalker.
Okay.
So
Okay. Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah. So where were we going with that?
yeah, so we were talking about like how they can make the time travel
Oh
elements
yeah, yeah.
work, why I'm skeptical about whether they'll be able to pull it off. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I've talked quite a bit there.
No, no, yeah. I was gonna say I definitely agree with like the Barrett part. So I think this was actually in one of my notes. I agree with that. That was very. I don't even think that needed. They didn't need. They didn't even like. They didn't have to do that. I think the only reason they did that, my theory is that they needed only 3 party members plus Red 13, so they had to find a way to get Barrett out of the way. So I agree.
Yeah,
That was a really like even when I saw, I was like, what?
yeah,
He's dead. Like that doesn't make any sense. Like,
yeah, I think that was a really
yeah,
stupid contrivance just
yeah,
to get the party down for the boss fight.
yeah,
Like that, like we want to have a Genova Dreamweaver boss battle here, but we need to find a way to get one of the characters out of commission. But I also think they did it as an in joke for the development team because if you look at interviews for the original FF7,
okay,
in one of the interviews they say that when they were considering who to kill off, like they eventually settled on Aerith, of course. But when they were discussing who to kill off, someone on the staff wondered, like maybe Barrett, but they decided, no, the black dude dies first trope is like is really stupid. It would be too obvious and it's cliche, and we got other things we can do with Barrett's character. So like that. So ultimately, yeah, they decided against that. I think this scene was reworked just as a callback, as a gag for the development team. But that's
oh,
actually a huge. But I can understand why they did that. But the problem is sacrificing the player's immersion, doing something that breaks the player's immersion just so people on the development team can have a good laugh. Like that's not how you tell stories. You know what I mean?
yeah. I mean, you could almost say it could be like even like I don't know if the word is fan service or like it's like for like the hardcore who might even have that knowledge of like the lore of because I think part of this game is for the OG fans who have because I think it's playing on those expectations like this the
Yeah.
entire like marketing the whole like the lead up like the whole story of like how we got to 7 remake like the kind of like I think in 2013 the remaster was announced, but lots of people at the conference were expecting an announcement for remake, so it didn't. So then people were upset, and then 2015 we get the announcement for remake. We're all ecstatic, and then it's kind of like it's been like there's like this I guess like like a meta narrative like this whole. It's kind of the same with what I keep calling back to like the thing that's like closest to me of this like phenomenon is like Evangelion. Like there's this whole
Yeah.
like other story. Like it's Evangelion is not just the story inside of the anime. It's like the production. It's the Ano's depression and then his kind of coming out of depression and like starting a family. And there's like this whole. So I think that's what's happening with remakes. So I think sometimes things that happen in remake are kind of like they're kind of trying to break the fourth wall and like talk to fans who have been following this whole
Yeah.
journey. So I kind of I appreciate it, even though that yeah, it's kind of weaker. That's kind of a weaker
Yeah.
element when they do things like that.
Yeah. Well, I want to mention that meta elements and like postmodern fourth wall breaking doesn't automatically ruin a story. Like I may have made some comments in the past, like YouTube comments suggesting that like I remember one comment I made where I said that postmodern elements have no place in fantasy fiction. I don't agree with that now. I think doing some fourth wall breaking meta commentary, I think it can work in fantasy fiction, but you need to weave it in such a way that it still feels justified in universe. So I recently played, just this past week, I finished Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Have you
Hellblade.
played it?
That's a newer game? Is
Uh,
that
it,
just
it came it came out back in like 2017, I think it was. It's by
oh
Ninja Theory.
no.
Not to be confused with Team Ninja, the guys who make Dead or Alive. Not to be confused
Oh,
with them.
okay.
Yeah,
You said Hellblade?
yeah. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Look it up. It's only about 7 or 8 hours, and it's really damn good. Like,
Senua's Sacrifice. Is this okay? I've never heard of this. Okay.
oh
Puzzle.
god, it's
Okay.
great. Like it's a if you're it's a bit of a psychological horror game sort of. So
Okay.
it's a bit scary, but that being said, it's really good. And the ending, like I actually got choked up a bit at the ending because its theme is really impactful. It's about like overcoming grief and coping with trauma, sort of.
Okay. All right.
The premise of the game is that the main character, it's set in like the Viking Age, like at the times of Norse mythology, and she is shamed and outcasted by her tribe because they believe that she's cursed because of her mental condition. She's actually schizophrenic. She has psychosis and hallucinations. So it's one of those stories where you're not entirely sure how much of it is real and how much of it is all in the character's head. So it could be supernatural, it could be psychological hallucinations. But that being said, it's great. It's really good. It's a really great way to spend 8 hours of your time. The gameplay is kind of mediocre, but the story more than makes up for it. Uh,
Interesting. Okay.
I will recommend if you when you do play it, put on the subtitles because the accents can make it a little hard to understand some of the dialogue. And I actually had to read along the Wikipedia plot summary as I was watching to make sure I didn't miss anything.
Okay.
So
So is it in English? So it's in English, or let me see.
yeah, yes, it's in English. It's one of those games where yeah, play it with headphones and have the
Okay.
subtitles on. Yeah,
I see. British studio. Okay, got it. Heavy
yeah,
British accents, I guessing.
sort of. Yeah,
Okay, I gotcha.
the way that they weave like the psychosis element of the main character into the story is really good, and they work it into the gameplay. Part of the symptoms of the psychosis is that she keeps hearing voices in her head. So if you play the game with a headset, it feels like you have voices in your head, and
Oh,
those voices actually give you gameplay tips like evade, for instance. Yeah,
okay. So
and it
like
actually
maybe it'll be like in one well, I forget, it's like one ear, and then the other you can hear the. I guess I'll play it. I'll find it. Yeah.
it's really good. It's very clever. It's a good example of how you can lean on the fourth wall while still telling a story that's extremely immersive. So postmodern meta commentary, like what Remake is doing, is actually it can work well so long as you don't destroy the player's immersion in the process and it still feels justified in universe. Spec Ops: The Line did the same thing. It's a commentary on like people who play shooter games, like why do you play shooter games? But the thing is that even if you miss the meta commentary part, you still have a story about a US Delta Force operator who is driven insane by the constant backfirings of his good intentions. And he ends up like I don't want to spoil the ending of that game, but his delusions end up fueling a lot of the narrative. It leans on the fourth wall again, but it doesn't. But it's still a solid, well-contained story. Yeah.
What was the name of that game?
Spec Ops: The Line.
Spec
It's
Ops the
yeah,
Line. Okay, I see. All right, I'll
yeah.
check these out. I'll probably even add a little bit of B-roll just so people have a little bit of context. Okay. I have never heard. Oh wow. Okay.
Both Spec Ops: The Line and Hellblade have kind of mediocre gameplay, but they're only about 6 or 7 hours a piece, and their stories more than make up for it. So
Yeah. Okay. I'll check those out.
yeah.
So you agree with like the kind of. So are you on board with it? Like, if I was just gonna simplify your take, so are you on board with it, or are you skeptical? Because I'm
Uh,
guessing skeptical, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's going to depend on how they're executed. I mentioned towards the end of my video that I'm going to wait until the trilogy is done and read up on all the story decisions before I decide to play them. Because, like, I really hate getting invested in a story only to then find out that it doesn't matter. And this is a persistent problem that I have with Final Fantasy sequels. They keep invalidating everything that you went through in the last game. I mean, let's just look at Creative Business Unit 1's track record. Final Fantasy X-2 undermines the emotional impact of 10's ending by bringing back Tidus. And not only that, but it kind of screws up the characters by changing them so much that it's
Yeah.
just like, what was the bloody point of having this be a sequel? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Uh, and then, what was it?
13.
Like, again, I don't know that much about Kingdom Hearts, but Dream Drop Distance invalidates basically the entire series up to that point by revealing that everything that you fought for didn't matter because it was all preordained by Xehanort as part of his master plan with time travel. So it's just
Mm.
like, what was the fucking point of the last 5 games then? And then Final Fantasy 13 2 had to retcon the ending of 13 so that Etro's intervention broke the space time continuum, banishing lightning to Valhalla. So that kind of renders the hero's victory at the end of 13 Pyrrhic at best.
Yeah.
Um, what was it? A couple others. Oh yeah, Chrono Cross completely ruins Chrono Trigger by yeah.
I haven't played. I haven't played.
Uh,
It's on my
okay.
list with the Xenogears. I need to still
Okay.
play Trigger. So, but
Okay.
I'll take your word for it that maybe. But people I've heard people say they enjoy those Chrono Cross and Chrono Trigger. I've heard those are just like legendary games.
Well, if it helps you, if it helps you feel any better, in this case, you might actually want me to let you know what you're getting in for with Chrono Cross,
All right,
sort of.
fair enough.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay. Chrono Cross kills off a lot of characters from Chrono Trigger off screen for no other reason than to get its own story to work, sort of. It kind of does it
Okay.
for shock value. And Chrono Cross also royally overcomplicates the time travel stuff. Chrono Cross's biggest mistake is that it tries to answer a question that should have never been addressed in the first place, which is what happened to all the timelines that were erased in Chrono Trigger? You know what I mean?
I haven't played, so I actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So Chrono Trigger,
Yeah.
they erase a lot of timelines because they rewrite things a lot by
Okay.
traveling back in time. Chrono Cross made the idiotic mistake of wondering what happened in all those timelines that were erased, and it's just like, dude, this is the grandfather paradox. This is a plot hole that you will never be able to fill in. Don't even try, or you're gonna give the audience an aneurysm. And yeah, so that's like Chrono Cross should not have done that. So
Okay.
um, that's the and it pulls a lot of stuff out of nowhere in the last half of its story. The last half feels like a massive exposition dump. So like
Mm.
that's the so that's the problem with Chrono Cross. Um, what was it? So yeah, we were talking about Final Fantasy sequels and validating their predecessors. Then Final Fantasy 15, Dawn of the Future, like retcons the hell out of the ending of the base game. Like, to be honest, in retrospect, I'm kind of glad that 15's DLC got canceled because I don't like the way the story went in like Dawn of the Future. They put it into a novel. Haven't bothered reading it because like yeah, it's not good. Um, what was
Yeah.
it?
I mean, yeah, I think I can agree with you. I mean, I haven't seen a sequel to, like, I would even say the compilation's very weak.
Yep.
Like
Advent Children undoes Sephiroth's defeat at the end of the original game just so they can have a sword fight with Cloud.
it doesn't, yeah, it never really made sense to me. But to me, I never really. So I was like a teenager when the movie came out.
Yeah.
I got the DVD. You know, for me, I was just like, oh yeah, cool. It's like, it's like, I mean, back then you have to, I guess, for context, right? Um, like I don't think. I think graphically, Advent Children still is kind of up there with, like, if you just think of
Oh
what they
yeah.
had to do at the time. It was just like, it was a spectacle for me. I think for me,
Yeah.
I'm a sucker. I'm a little bit of a sucker for spectacle. I mean,
Yeah.
Nobuo
And I can
Uematsu, his soundtrack, the visuals, but yeah, even then, like, I would sit through like the movie, and I'm gonna go watch it tomorrow in theaters just for nostalgia value for the most part. Not because I already know I'm gonna get bored at parts. Like, I'm already prepared. Like, the story, like, I'm with you. I'm kind of with you. Like, I agree. Like, the plot, it's like, what is going on? Why does he have these, like, his cousin, like Sephiroth's clones or children? I don't know what you want to call
yeah,
them. Like, where is this all coming
the
from? I
yeah,
thought
yeah, the
everyone died.
remnants.
I thought everyone died at the end of 7. I thought, the planet is reborn. Like, what is, like, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to be fair, in the original game, like it's not entirely clear that the planet wiped out humanity, and I don't think the developers intended for that. I remember an interview where they said that they intended for the final cutscene to show some smoke over the ridge, implying that humans are like still running stuff, sort of.
Hmm.
So I don't think we were meant to assume that the planet wiped out humanity, and so I don't mind the fact that Advent Children established that they survived. But Advent Children has a lot of problems with its writing, like bringing Rufus Shinra back, even though he should have been reduced to ashes by the weapon attack. And then the biggest problem with Advent Children is that basically all of its character backstory and all the setup for what happens in it is consigned to the Case of Tifa novel. None of it's actually in the movie itself. So it's like In fact, Cloud's arc in Advent Children has the same problem that Luke's arc did in The Last Jedi. His change in character happens entirely off screen,
Oh
save
yeah.
for a single flashback. And so the audience is given no time to adjust to his change in character and understand why he ended up the way he did. Yeah.
I might push back on like the Cloud take because I think Cloud's like moody disposition or his demeanor in Advent Children, like given the world they were in, it's like post everything that happened in Seven, and the kids have the whatever the geostigma disease. It's kind of
Hmm.
I can see him being a little bit like moody
Yeah.
and like I mean even after like what happened in Seven where he kind of goes through like this like, existential crisis and kind of comes out of it. I'm not
Yeah.
convinced like after that he would just change as a person. I always saw Cloud as kind of like moody, kind of like a soldier, like soldier through and through. And then like when he has that mental break in the original game, that was like a clear like, oh wow, there's like something, like he's not just like brooding like just a stoic soldier. So when in Seven, I in the Advent Children, I didn't think it was too shocking. I was kind of like, I guess he kind of reverted back to his status, like what he usually is like.
Yeah, well, that's fair. That is fair. And part of the reason Cloud is so misunderstood actually is because of translation problems.
Mm.
Because, for instance, his line "not interested" was actually a catchphrase in the original Japanese, but in the original game, it was inconsistently translated as "don't care, not my thing," thus diluting the impression that he actually had a catchphrase to begin with. So when Advent Children and later works all strictly used "not interested," English speaking fans saw it as a retroactive attempt to turn him into Squall from Final Fantasy VIII,
Mm.
when in fact his whole "not interested" thing was actually a part of his character from the very beginning. And incidentally, Squall's catchphrase, in Final Fantasy VIII, which I think was "don't care," was also it mistranslated. What he says in Japanese is "warukata," which basically translates as "my bad." So
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. Like the 90s, like yeah, like localization, which I will say that's another thing. So I'll just go another point for Remake is just like the
yeah,
localization in this game, like, or I think that's the
oh yeah,
term for it. Like it's so well done. It's
I
so
agree. Yeah.
yeah, you agree. It's so well done, and that's another like point in my bucket. If I have like a
Mhm.
bucket of like good and a bucket of bad, like this bucket is just full, and it's like that's just another thing, like the localization, and that's something
Yeah.
like as someone who grew up like through like growing up with these games, like I'm used to like bad translations. You see the same thing in anime. Like you would see, like we grew up, like I grew up with Pokemon, where they like instead of rice cakes, they had jelly donuts. Like this
Yeah.
whole weird like we can't just like give it to you the way the
Yeah.
original author wrote it. We're gonna put our own weird American interpretation, and
Yeah.
sometimes these teams are like not well funded, so they kind of
Well,
do this last minute.
to some extent, as someone who does know a fair bit of Japanese, I actually do like it when localizations try to adjust things a little bit
Okay.
for for the target audience. Because the point of translating something like with voiceover is that you want to make it sound natural in the language that you're translating it into. So if you're just going to have it be word for word and you need to know the cultural context of the original lines, then you've kind of defeated the point of the localization. You know what I mean? You need to make it accessible to someone who doesn't know the culture. That's the point of localization.
Fair.
And for the most part, I think Remake actually does a really good job. There are like most of the voice acting is pretty good. There is the odd line that could have been better. Some of the kids sound a little bit off, and one of Barrett's lines, like "What have you done?" Like that wasn't very good. But the rest of it was all pretty stellar. And John Eric Bentley, like I really love how he plays Barrett. In fact, of all the characters in Remake, I think Barrett was actually the best because his arc is most heavily tied into the whole conflict with Shinra. So I think he really got fleshed out the most in Remake relative to like what we've seen from all the other characters up to this point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, definitely with yeah, JEB, John Eric Bentley, like, yeah, he has so much range. He goes from like typical. I think this is a little bit of a crude analogy, but like, what's that guy from A Force? AT? What's the guy?
18, Mr. T.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Mr. T. He goes from like kind of like Mr. T to like when he's with Marlene, you see that softer side,
absolutely.
and then
Yeah.
like his whole like kind of like his philosophy kind of actually like he's the only character who probably goes through like you said like has a full kind of arc. He goes from
Yeah.
like just like Shinra bad, the planet, we got to save the planet, to like
Hmm.
more or less understanding why things are the way they are
Yeah.
by the end of at least Remake.
Yeah, that's why I'm kind of a little disappointed that they spared, like, as far as we can tell, they seem to have spared all of Avalanche because, like, I feel like that kind of undermines part of his arc a bit. But that being said, yeah, he's still done a lot of justice. The other characters are all also done really well, but most of their arcs happen later in the original game story before Remake reaches them. So, yeah, like Tifa's arc really comes to a head in the live stream scene, which we won't get until part 3 of the Remake trilogy. So yeah, she's still well done in Remake, but it won't be until part 3 that we actually see more of like what her actual inner demons.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I think we get a little taste of it. Like she seems very conflicted about like what they're doing, at least in the. But yeah,
yeah,
that the deeper stuff won't come until like, who knows? Maybe it'll come in this game. Who knows?
yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so what was it? There was something else we were gonna discuss. Like, yeah, we were talking about localization. Something else. Was there anything else about localization?
No, I think I'll just continue. So,
Actually, one more thing I just remembered.
go ahead.
Cloud's line in chapter 9, like when Tifa notes his dress, like nailed it. I know. Thank you.
Ye-
Moving on. That was 100% an invention of the English
Of course,
localization.
yeah.
In Japanese, he just says like there was no other way, sort of. It's much
Oh.
funnier in the English localization. So I do love it when localizers manage to spice things up. Fun fact, in the Japanese dub of Revenge of the Sith, like Star Wars, you know Obi-Wan's line, only a Sith deals in absolutes.
That sounds familiar. Sure.
Yeah, a lot of fans have criticized that line because it's really hypocritical because everything the Jedi does is also pretty absolute. That's part of the reason Anakin got dissatisfied with them. The fact that they don't allow love and marriage, for instance. So in the Japanese dub of Revenge of the Sith, they actually correct that by changing Obi-Wan's line to Shis no Ronriwa Dokusai Shugida, which means the way of the Sith is despotism. So like authoritarian rule, sort of. So therefore, it makes more sense with his claim that his allegiance is to the Republic and democracy, and he will do what he must. Yeah.
So localization can actually enhance the some of the flaws in the uh, it gives like it's like fixing the flaws of like maybe something in the script. You
Yeah,
can then
exactly.
fix it later in with a good localization team. But
Exactly.
yeah, I think we brought that up because we were saying that like some line I some of characters' personality was like maybe misinterpreted in the English.
In the original
Yeah,
game,
in the
yeah.
original game.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and before that, we were talking about Cloud's character in Advent Children, how like his change in character happens entirely off screen. I discuss a lot of this in section 7 of my video, where I talk about how a lot of the stuff from the Case of Tifa novel should have been in the movie, like the scene where he has to bring flowers to Aerith's mother in the Forgotten City. Like that would have been that really should have been in the movie. In fact, it would have made it more impactful when Cloud returns to the Forgotten City,
Mm-hmm.
like to fight the remnants halfway through Advent Children. And actually, that actually ties into that's actually a really good segue into another issue I want to bring up. Actually,
Sure.
it's something I discuss in my video, and it actually is a major problem with Creative Business Unit 1's writing. I feel like one of the biggest problems with Creative Business Unit 1 is that they keep trying to tell nonlinear stories, but nonlinear stories are very difficult to pull off. They've been trying to do that ever since they did it with the original FF7, but what they're failing to recognize is the nature of setup and payoff. Storytelling is all about setup and payoff. If something is going to happen later in your story, you need to set it up early on. One of the best examples of this is the movie Up, for instance. Like the opening sequence, 10 minutes, we see Carl and Ellie's life, and that provides context for everything else that happens in the rest of the movie. Imagine if Up was told non-linearly. Imagine if it started with Carl taking the house to Paradise Falls for reasons unknown, and then his life with Ellie was told intermittently through flashbacks throughout the movie. It wouldn't be as good, would it? Right? Like,
it would be harder to follow. I could agree with that.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
I
it would
think.
be
Go ahead.
and it
Go
would be
ahead.
less yeah, and it would be less impactful. And this is the reason why, like, some of the film critics that I follow absolutely hate flashbacks. Like, they say they hate them on principle. I don't hate flashbacks on principle. I think they can be done very well. But the reason why a lot of them hate flashbacks is because a lot of flashbacks give the setup after the payoff. The important information, the background context, is given after the moment, the emotional moment of impact has already occurred. So the moment of impact falls flat. So you essentially have a payoff with no setup and then a retroactive attempt to explain it. Whereas it would be a lot more impactful if the setup came first and then the payoff came later. What I mean?
No, yeah. I agree with that. I think I was gonna say. I was gonna say. Yeah. Advent Children. I agree. It's missing a lot of like. Yeah, if they had added that scene, yeah, with Cloud coming to hand, talk to Elmira. Hey, by the way, your daughter's dead.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think. Yeah, I kind of wonder why they didn't do that. Now I'm thinking about it. I didn't think
I
about
think
it
the main
before.
reason why is because Advent Children was just an excuse to show fight scenes because the art department wanted to show off their college educations. What I mean?
Fair. I mean, it
Yeah.
was cool. It was nice to see.
Yeah.
I
It's a guilty pleasure of
yeah,
mine,
yeah.
and like, so I enjoy it as a guilty pleasure, and that's kind of why I have the issue with it being shoehorned into the ending of Remake, like the fight with Sephiroth without enough build up. Like, it feels like, dude, it's one thing to have a spin-off movie for guilty pleasure. It's another thing to flat out replace the ending of Remake with guilty pleasure that doesn't feel built up to. Yeah,
See, now I can push back. I'll push back against that because I
please
think
do.
so. This is gonna get to the point where I was gonna eventually get to anyway. Why is introducing Sephiroth? Why is showing him in this game such a bad idea? I know in the original game we don't see him until later. I Why is it such a bad idea to show him now?
Well, actually, I can
He's like
answer that.
I think
Yeah.
of him as like it's like Batman. Do we
Yeah.
always have to show? This is my argument. Do we
Mhm.
always have to show the origin story of for every new Spider-Man movie? Do we have to show Uncle Ben's death? Do we have to see Batman's origin story when he sees his mom? Like we at this point, it's like lore. We already know. Sephiroth is in Kingdom Hearts. He's in Smash Brothers.
Mhm.
There's tons of merch. There's memes about Sephiroth. We know who he is. We know he's the big bad. Everyone and their mom knows who Sephiroth is. Why is it so bad to like introduce him in this game with the context of this game is kind of playing to like the whole a little bit of that meta narrative where
He's screwing up the timeline.
yeah.
Yeah. So at least there's a story justification for him to be there. He's throwing the events off course, or at least Cloud's hallucinations of him are throwing them off course. So yeah, I want to actually clarify that I actually don't have a problem with Sephiroth appearing early in the story because I can kind of understand the logic. I mean, like, I disagree with the idea that Sephiroth can't be scary anymore because we know what he looks like. I mean, everyone knows what a shark looks like. That didn't make Jaws any less scary. Everyone knows what a xenomorph looks like. Alien Isolation is still one of the most intense games I've ever played, and I love it. Like, seriously, if you haven't played Alien Isolation, play it. It's good.
Okay.
It's if you want a survival horror tension experience, it's really good.
Alien
Um,
Isolation. Okay.
yeah, it's great. Yeah. So the problem I find with Sephiroth in Remake isn't that they introduced him sooner. I think that's fine. I think the problem is that they don't actually give him much of anything to do. Like in almost all of his appearances, he just shows up taunting Cloud with cryptic monologues. In other words, Sephiroth's character in Remake is defined almost entirely by the things that he says, not the things that he does. He doesn't actually do much of anything in Remake. The only two things he does are, like, aside from taunting Cloud with monologues, he only does two things: uh, kill Barrett and steal Genova's body to get the plot in motion, and then you fight him at the end. And that's basically it. He doesn't really do much else. But the way that you make a villain intimidating and scary is you need to give them things to do. You need to show that they're powerful. Like when Palpatine used Force Lightning for the first time in Return of the Jedi, there was no indication that he could, like, that when we saw it for the first time, it was like, holy shit, this guy is powerful. With Remake, with the exception of the ending, we don't really see enough of what Sephiroth can do throughout the game. He feels like his appearances just feel like he shows up for a moment to taunt Cloud with cryptic monologues, and it's just like, what the hell are you talking about? It just gets tedious. You know what I mean? They didn't really. They could have done more to work him into the narrative and actually given him something to do. That's my issue.
I mean, I think he did a lot. I think that is, I mean, him showing up, taunting Cloud. I feel like we're getting like an insight in what Cloud was kind of going through in actually the original game, where he's
I
having like
suppose.
these like flashbacks that weren't really fleshed out because of the technology at the time, and now we're seeing them in, like, whatever, 1080p 4K, high definition. We're
Yeah.
seeing it. We already know what this was all about, because most of us have either played the game or have know the story of the game. There's tons of playthroughs you can just sit through if sitting down and playing the entire game end to end is, not feasible for you. You can't go back because, the graphics or whatever. Even though there's now, Echo S, I think, is like the one where they have full voice acting, and the character models are a little bit updated. Yeah, so I think where was I trying to go with? I think he did a lot. I think that was part of it. Like, we're getting like a taste, because we all know Sephiroth is. I mean, he's a time traveling demon. He wasn't doing that in the original game. I think that's like,
Yeah.
he's super powerful. He's so powerful. He's just like playing with them. Like, he's playing with them. And at the end of chapter 18, when we defeat, we didn't defeat anything, honestly.
Yeah.
We defeated an image of him. Like, he is like messing with us. Like, he's so powerful right now, and we don't know what his plan is. We don't know what. So that's what is the draw for me, is like, I don't know what is going to happen. Which, in your argument, you don't, for good reason, you don't trust him. For me, I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm excited to see where they take this. You
And
know?
that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, for me, the biggest issue is the payoff going to be worth the chatter? Because that's the thing. A lot of people, like I've seen, have been saying that, well, even if they totally bomb this, the years of theory crafting will make up for it, like the fun with that. But that to me is very similar to the whole, like, the game is better if you play it with friends excuse. But frankly, anything is better with friends. And what about new people who get into Final Fantasy VII years down the line who weren't around at the time the trilogy was being made? Is the story still going to be good for them? So that's the thing. I'm not really. I'm the type of person who thinks, like, really long term about, like, how well is this story going to be received decades from now? Are people still going to love it after the theory crafting is all over? Are like that's my biggest issue, because I don't want I don't for me it's not worth sacrificing a timeless story for the sake of just a few years of internet chatter. You know what I mean?
Yeah, see, that's where I start to go back. I guess, you've got a point there, right? Like, for newer fans, for people, if people, 20, 30, 20, 40, when this is like a classic, this is like Remake is the Remake trilogy is like a classic. It will be actually kind of hard. And I think
Mhm.
they really probably see, this is what I was hoping they were going to do with Ever Crisis, but it seems like they're going, like, there's like this it's kind of more like a backstory, and it's not actually because I thought Ever Crisis was going to be straight up like, okay, for the OG fans, you wanted that turn-based game that is like literally a one-for-one copy, and that's not what we got. Unfortunately, it
Yeah.
seems like it's more of like a pay-to-play kind of little bit
Yeah,
of backstory.
yeah, I couldn't really give less of a shit about Ever Crisis, to be
Yeah,
honest.
same.
Yeah, right. And I think I'll stick to the original game with mods. Yeah,
Yeah, and I think that's unfortunate because that's a lost opportunity. Because it would give newer fans a little bit more of that context with like updated graphics. Because that's what I was hoping. That's what I thought Ever Crisis was gonna be. I was like, ooh, we can actually play like the OG game, but like, because they already have all the scenes from like they have the voice acting. They just have to like kind of port those on and then just add you have like the classic battle system and it's on mobile. I thought that's what they're gonna do, and they kind of went this other direction with it. And I feel like they should have taken the resources from that battle royale game they did with
yeah,
and just like have those two teams just focus on like porting, because I know we have like ports for mobile. So I was
yeah,
hoping Ever Crisis was gonna be like that updated graphical, like you're getting like the OG game, but you're getting like updated graphics, and it's kind of satisfying the older fans, the purists, I guess, in the sense. You're
yeah,
satisfying them. You give them kind of what they wanted, more of what they were looking for, and then it's also a way for newer fans who don't understand or know the entire backstory and don't want to just watch a video, or they want to actually play through the game and have that context. That's what I was hoping. But
yeah.
yeah, that is kind of a weaker point. And I
Yeah,
think this
it's
is
telling that they had to remaster and re-release Crisis Core because so many people didn't know who Zack was.
mhm,
Like part of the reason why a lot of people, most people in Japan know who Zack is because remember, Crisis Core was a PSP game, and mobile gaming is huge in Japan. Portable gaming consoles,
yeah.
they're big in Japan because Japan is a country where you have to spend most of your life outdoors, hanging out with friends. There's very much a cultural emphasis on being part of a group. So since you're always out and about, it makes sense to have a portable gaming system. That was the idea behind the Switch. The Switch allows you to go back and forth between like playing at home, like as on a big TV. That's how Western gamers like to play games. But for Japanese audiences who don't have the time at home to play console
Mhm.
games, the Switch allows them to take it anywhere they go. So that's the appeal of it. Yeah, yeah. So Zack is well known in Japan, but mobile and portable gaming systems aren't as big over here in the West. So far fewer people over here know who Zack is. So that's part of the reason why they had, and it's also the fact that Final Fantasy just isn't as big in the West as it is in Japan, because like things like Call of Duty and Marvel, they get all of the attention and the marketing budget. Yeah, so that's part of the issue right there.
Okay.
I made a joke about this in my video where Katase seems to think that everyone who hasn't even played the original game knows who the characters are, and I showed a Photoshop image of like an old grandmother at the computer, like, oh yeah, that's Sephiroth from the video game my son likes to play. He's a genetically enhanced super soldier with the cells of an alien, and the protagonist, Cloud Strife, hates him for killing his mom and burning his hometown
Mhm.
down. Like, yeah, I don't think any grandmothers over here like know that much about
Oh
Final
yeah,
Fantasy
I
VII.
see. I see. You're talking about more of like Western audiences, like that disconnect of some of the characters.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So yeah, so it's telling that they had to remaster Crisis Core because a lot of people like didn't have the context for remake. Um, and what was it? Was it? And I will say this, like, much as I do have criticisms with what remake is doing, I can understand like the logic in using this timeline framing device to make it a sequel so that the original game is not replaced. I mean, like the Resident Evil 2 remake basically replaces the original game more or less.
Okay.
So to some extent, I actually do agree that it's a good thing that this remake trilogy doesn't completely like replace the original game. So that I can agree is a good point. Yeah.
Okay.
One more thing I just forgot to mention. I mentioned the problem with flashbacks and how they give the payoff like before the setup has even happened.
Mhm.
So the payoff falls flat because the information is given afterwards. I'm already seeing a bit of this in remake. How like in chapter 2 of remake, Sephiroth says to Cloud, "You have to leave. You have to live." And then now in the Rebirth demo, we find out that that was what Cloud's mother said to him, like when she died, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, I'm not entirely sure how they could have structured this differently, but this is exactly the problem that I'm talking about giving exposition in hindsight, where the first time you're watching a movie, the impactful moments fall flat because the important information is given retroactively. So it's
You
just
don't think
like,
you don't think that's just like foreshadowing?
yeah. Well, maybe not foreshadowing, but the point is that I think the moment in Chapter 2 of Remake where Cloud lunges at Sephiroth
Mm-hmm.
after he says, like, you have to leave, you have to live, it could have hit, like, it would have felt more satisfying and been more impactful and emotionally moving if we already knew that it was what Cloud's mother said beforehand. So it's kind of like,
Mm.
how does it look to a first time viewer? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people like I didn't even remember. Yeah, it's hard to remember those kinds of like
Yeah.
finer details. Yeah, it would have. Yeah,
Yeah.
we've more or less covered every point that I had on your video. I don't know if you
All
had
right.
any other notes. I have one more kind of like minor point that we haven't discussed,
Okay.
and it. Go ahead.
Just before we get into discussing it, can you just give me an overview of what it is? I want to see if it ties into my notes.
The minor point is we haven't talked about Leslie.
Oh, Leslie. Yeah, I mentioned that I'm not a fan of Leslie's character. Yeah, I wasn't able to fit this into my video for time constraints. It's relegated to a footnote. Like if you watch my video, beneath it, there's a link to a Google Doc with all my sources and citations. And I have a bunch of additional notes that go along with it, like certain points that I couldn't fit into the video itself.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the reason I didn't like Leslie is because I find that his motivation is really, really weak, and his whole sequence has a lot of unearned emotion. Like there's already enough teen angst and love interest to go around in Final Fantasy VII, and his motivation for joining Corneo, like Corneo, like picked his fiance as one of his brides. Like, first of all, like why does she want to be one of Corneo's brides? That was not well thought out at all. Why did it have to be her? And why, like it's just, and not only that, but it also makes him look more shallow as a character, that he's only doing it for selfish reasons. I think Leslie would have been a lot more interesting if the whole reason he joined Corneo's group is because he wanted to take down this whole organization. Because think about what Corneo does. I mean, he beds women with his resources and his connections, and then he drops them into his Rancor pit and feeds them to his monsters so that they never like reveal to anyone else like what he's like in bed or whatever. So it's just like that, like he's a horrible person. And like I'm very sensitive to issues involving sex trafficking or human commercial sexual exploitation. I mean,
All this to say, but I kind of do agree with you. I think Corneo actually doesn't come off that menace. He doesn't even come off that bad. He
yeah,
kind of
now to
he kind of comes off a little like I didn't get like evil. Like I got the evil part because it's like, oh, he's kind of taking it was not explained well what happens to women in Corneo's dungeon. It's just kind of
yeah,
like they're forced to be wives and then he discards of them, but it's kind of implied, but it's not really explained well. So
yeah, it's
yeah, I agree that's kind of a weaker part as well. Like
yeah, Leslie would have been far more interesting if, rather than giving him a token satellite love interest, the reason why he was trying to take down Corneo is because of a moral conviction that he wants to destroy this human trafficking ring, sort of. And to be fair to Remake, it couldn't really handle this subject matter with the type of levity that I would have if I were writing it, because Remake had the fan expectation of they need to recreate the cross-dressing scene. They need to make it campy and comical, like
yeah.
when Aerith and Cloud and Tifa threatened to cut his balls off, for instance. Like they had to make
Yeah.
it they had to make it comical, so they didn't really have much of a choice there. But they could have given Leslie a better motivation. So the scenes where with his character just fall flat because it makes it seem like he hates Corneo for selfish reasons rather than because Corneo is an evil mafia leader who beds and then kills women. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's not. Yeah, it is kind of. Yeah, you have a good point there. It's like they had to like. Yeah, it's like it would be kind of jarring to have that comedy, that comical aspect of like, yeah, the cross dressing, yeah, the whole scene where they're in, because it Corneo does feel kind of like a cartoon villain
Yeah,
in Remake, which I guess he was like that if I remember in the OG game too, kind of, but I think it was a little bit more clear he was just not a good guy. Like in
yeah,
Remake, it's kind of alluded to that he's kind of a scummy guy, but it's a
yeah,
little bit cartoony the way it's handled in Remake. But
yeah.
maybe I think this also goes to another point that I wanted to get to is the plate falling, no one dying.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah, I think it's
yeah,
in that same that they didn't know how to handle like something heavy like that
yeah,
in this game, like
yeah. That
actually
that
committing to killing, like seeing bodies, like you get the like, oh man, like when the plate fell, like we all know it's gonna happen, and it's just like we're like seeing it like seeing it display. It's like, oh wow, this is what they were trying to convey. And it's like you see the destruction, you're like, oh geez, but then nobody died, so it's just
Yeah,
like,
and not to
yeah,
mention it's totally undermined by Cat She showing up and doing a Planet of the Apes impression. You know what I mean? Yeah,
yeah, I can.
I did that in my video. Like I showed the clip with the audio. You maniac! You burned it up! Damn you all to hell! Yeah.
Yeah,
Now, yeah. Well, the thing on the plate fall, like you're probably wondering what my thoughts are on it. On its own, I don't think the plate fall is I don't think it's done as poorly as some critics say that it is. I think the biggest problem is just the expectation of it. Let me try to explain. If you're watching it for the first time, if you're a first time player and you haven't seen like the original game, the plate fall is still a major shock. Yes, the people are evacuated, but seeing all their homes destroyed and like these are poor people and they have very little and now they're reduced back to nothing,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of focus on the fear and all that of them desperately trying to evacuate. In a lot of ways, in a lot of ways, it actually does help to emphasize the fear and the pain and hardship that the characters go through. So if you're a first time player, Remake's platefall scene actually is still pretty impactful.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
the problem is that because we as original players know the original game story that the platefall is happening, that when we are playing chapter 3 for the first time as a remake player and we know the original game story and we see sector 7 being fleshed out, it raises the expectation that the loss is going to be a lot more impactful than it ultimately
Mm.
ended up being in remake.
Okay.
So if you're playing it going in from the original game, your expectations are going to be that all of these characters are going to die horribly. And so if you've played the original game, the platefall scene is going to feel a little bit quaint when you get to it because of the expectations. But if you look at remake in a vacuum as it is, and you like only focus on like what do the characters go through, it actually is still pretty impactful to its credit. It's just not as impactful as it could have been. And I think one way they could have done this is if like maybe they had some of the NPCs die, but some survive. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
No,
Yeah,
yeah, I think that was another thing that I would definitely I would agree with you on. Like I think this is maybe an overall point. I can definitely agree because this goes to like I think you also critique the lack of the blood trail
oh yeah,
in Shinra. Like I can agree. It's like it feels like a more PG, like the
13. Yeah,
PG-13. Like maybe you occasionally get like someone's like a stab and then a blood splatter, but it's like missing a little bit more of that like intensity.
it
Yeah,
misses the raw savagery of the
yeah,
violence. Yeah,
hmm,
and that's the Yeah, and I can kind of understand it. Like I've heard a lot of game developers, well, maybe not heard of it, but to the best of my knowledge, a lot of game developers and a lot of American filmmakers have been begging for a soft R/soft M rating for ages 15 and up. So, like,
okay,
I think there's too much of a jump from an unrestricted 13 in the PG-13 teen rating to a restricted 17 M rating.
hmm.
I think we need to have a restricted 15 and up. Under 15, you need a guardian sort of thing or permission to buy. I think
So
that'd be great.
so like a
And
PG-13 plus kind of.
yeah, Canada has something similar to that. Like up here in Canada, like we use America's rating system for video games, but up here for movies, we have a different rating system that goes G, PG, 14A, so 14 and under needs parental supervision, and then 18A, 18 and under needs parental supervision, and then R, and R is restricted only to people 18 and up. So.
So there's like two levels between R and PG-13, and okay, interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in Canada, the Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix,
Mm-hmm.
it got a 14A rating because it wasn't violent or grotesque enough to go all the way up to 18A. Uh, so
Sorry, I'm gonna
like
check. I'm just gonna check Joker rate. I think it was R here in the states.
yes, yeah,
Joker
yeah,
rating, is it rated
yeah,
R? Is that what it was?
yeah. But in Canada, it's 14A. So which
Yeah.
does surprise me a little bit because even though the movie isn't the most graphically violent like R movie I've ever seen, it's like a soft R. The whole movie does still feel like you're delving into the mind of a school shooter. So it's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
like, yeah, I'm a little surprised by the 14A rating. But there are a lot of movies that are R in the U.S. but get 14A in Canada. So Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines, for instance, 14A. Um,
Hmm.
what are a couple others?
Do you know if Fight Club? Where does Fight Club kind of stand on that?
I think Fight Club still got 18A in Canada.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
surprising.
It's
Okay.
a bit of a harder R. Same with the Alien movies. What was it? Yeah. So it's kind of like in between. Most of the Avengers movies get a Canadian PG rating, which is sort of between an American PG and PG-13, sort of.
Oh wow. Okay, so it's not even. So even Endgame where the slash you little didn't they hacked off Thanos's head, right? That's
Yeah.
that didn't
Well,
get the full PG-13 over in Canada.
well, concessions are made for alien blood. So the same thing with getting back to remake. It's the same thing there.
Mm.
Like if you color of blood, so it doesn't feel as grotesque and gory.
Oh.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why Alien versus Predator got a PG-13 rating in the States because most of
Mm.
the gore is just green alien acid. So yeah,
Interesting. Yeah, it's like a different mentality. I think any blood, any like implication of blood is like instant at the very least PG-13.
yeah, yeah,
And
sort of. Have you seen Osmosis Jones?
I that was a long time ago.
Yeah, like Thrax, like the villain, like
uh,
who is like portrayed as like a cross between an international terrorist and a serial killer, and he
uh,
uses his claw to burn the victims until they explode into pus. I mean,
okay.
the color is different because it's like their cells, like it's a set in a world where like the human body is like a city where the
Yeah.
cells are people, but it's like it's impressive what they got away with, and he's a surprisingly dark villain for such a goofy, ostensibly kid-oriented film.
Yeah, I think that one got PG if I
It's actually the same thing with paintball games. Paintball players don't like red paintballs because you can't tell if the injury is real or if it's paint. So
I see, I see, I see.
yeah,
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's just getting to the point like I think I mean maybe there's a valid reason maybe they don't want an M rating for the game, so that might
yeah,
be
they
just like
definitely don't because that seriously limits like the number of people who can buy it. And Final
yeah.
Fantasy does kind of target a teen audience, sort of. Yeah.
Yeah. But I still feel like I guess as an older person I it's just like I wanted a little bit more like carnage. So this is where I half agree with you on like keeping certain side characters alive, like
Yeah.
Biggs and I mean we don't know if Biggs. Oh wait, it's what's the fat guy's Biggs, right? No,
No, the
no.
fat guy is Wedge.
Yeah, Wedge,
Biggs.
Wedge. So Biggs is alive. Wedge is implied that he probably survived.
Yeah,
um,
we know the trope. If a character falls into a dark abyss and we don't see the corpse, they're 100% still alive.
yeah,
So yeah,
definitely. And and it seems like maybe Jesse's also still alive from like
Yeah,
the implication of the trailers. She's probably in the performance.
yeah,
Is what I think is the implication, but we don't know. Who knows? Maybe, but for sure we know Biggs is alive in some universe, which might be
yeah,
going back to your whole, the cop outs of like time
yeah.
travel and.
Yeah, that's actually another reason why the ending left such a. To get back more to the topic of the ending, that's actually part of the reason why the ending left such a bad impression on a lot of players. Like I said, that a lot of Remake fans were telling critics, watch Maximilian Dude's podcast. He'll explain it. You'll love it. Actually, the whole concept of an FF7 multiverse is a huge deal breaker for me because the thing is, the mere existence of a Final Fantasy VII multiverse where you have multiple timelines running in parallel, that would ipso facto imply that Remake is itself set in a different universe from the original game. Remake's characters would not be the same characters that I know and love from the OG, just alternate universe knockoffs. And that just means that, like, now why should I care whether they live and die? I mean, yes, they're well characterized, but the thing is that if they're just clones of the characters that I actually care about, then then like that just kind of ruins the story. Because I mean, it's the same thing with clones and fiction. If a character gets cloned, don't get attached to the clone. They will die and no one will care because clones are not unique characters. They're copies of another character. And in fiction, not being unique automatically makes something expendable. Like, know
Hmm.
what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can see it where maybe it's all. I don't know how they're gonna make it. I guess yeah, it's like if you think too hard about time travel, it all kind of doesn't make sense. But for me, like I think one of the points we didn't directly talk about it, but like I personally am cool with. I love like attempting to like you know make explanations for time travel. So one of my favorite movies is Tenet. I know a lot of people don't like that movie.
Yeah.
I liked it. I just like the
I haven't
idea.
seen it. It's
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, but
I tried looking for it, but the only places I could find it, I have to order it, and I don't, and I figured it wouldn't show up on time for me to watch before the yeah,
gotcha. Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. I don't know if you like Christopher Nolan movies.
yeah,
It's not his best film, but I think for me
yeah,
it's interesting. I'm a sucker for like quantum mechanics and like
yeah,
all trying to how could we time travel if it was possible or like how
yeah.
try to theorize it through fiction and
Yeah,
um
and
yeah.
that's fair enough. But the thing is, fiction is created by humans for humans. I recommend that you look up a book called The Storytelling Animal. It's all about humans, like why we tell stories and why they appeal to us. What's their evolutionary purpose? And
Okay.
the reason why is because they put things into context. I mean, this is the case if you talk to children. When you try to explain abstract moral dilemmas to children, they'll have a very difficult time understanding it. But if you frame it in the context of a story, then they will immediately get the point. Uh,
Hmm.
like, uh, like that's the point of Aesop's fables, the boy who cried wolf. You know what I mean? Like
Okay.
that, don't lie
Oh
because
yeah,
next
yeah.
time you tell the truth, people won't believe you. Yeah,
Yeah, I think that applies to adults as well. I mean, stories are. I mean, that fiction, right? Fiction is
yeah,
like
exactly.
the best way
So
to teach people
yeah.
things.
Yeah. If you're interested in quantum mechanics, that's totally fine. But the thing is that quantum mechanics is an abstract intellectual concept. It's not something that we evolved with. It's the kind of thing where we understand the words being said, but it doesn't resonate at a deep emotional level. So if you want to turn quantum mechanics into a story, you need to attach a very human relatable premise to it. Take Interstellar, for instance. Interstellar does have quantum mechanics stuff, but the story isn't about
True.
time travel or the fourth dimension. Interstellar is a story about love and feeling motivated to survive and protect and like ensure a future for those you love and care about no matter what. And as an added punch to the gut, spoilers for Interstellar, skip ahead 20 seconds if you don't want spoilers. The end of the movie is all about the fear of outliving your children dying before you. It uses the time travel to accelerate the main character's
Mm.
age so that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That
Mhm.
that speaks to us at a very emotional, intuitive level. So quantum mechanics and time travel, the best stories which incorporate them use them to explore something at a deeper level that makes us feel something. Final Fantasy VII Remake, it's interesting what they're doing at like an intellectual level. Like they're trying to tell a remake that's also a sequel. But the thing is that it's just like, what is it saying that is relatable? What about it appeals at an emotional, human evolutionary level? You know what I mean? That's the
Yeah.
issue there. Now, they could make this work. They could do something with it later. And that's why I'm going to hold off criticizing it for that. But we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the way this could possibly work and still kind of, get into like the ideas of like how to accept loss and move on with your life.
Mhm.
I think if in the end you find out that somehow, if let's just say purists get ready to get your pitchforks out, get ready to get ready to hate me. If Zach and Cloud somehow
Oh,
have
I'm
the two.
way ahead of you, boy.
Oh, is that real? Is that real?
No, the blade is completely dull.
Okay,
It's a
okay.
replica. Yeah,
It looks nice. That's shiny.
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah. So get ready to katana me. Um, if Cloud and Zack somehow are able to like come together and somehow one of them has to be sacrificed and there's no way they'll ever be revived back. That's the end of all this time travel stuff. Like it's like
Yeah.
definitive. You are killing off a character that you brought him back and then you killed him again. Oh, that would hurt. That would hurt even more. And not to mention, maybe it's Aerith, maybe it's Tifa,
Yeah.
maybe it's all of them. Maybe it's Cloud. Maybe we have to sacrifice Cloud in the end. That would hurt. That would
Yeah.
hurt. That might hurt more than Aerith for me. I don't know.
Yeah, it could. We'll have to see. And like it's like I think the way that they're going about this does feel a little bit like contrived, like they're doing part of it for shock value. But that being said, they could theoretically salvage it if they consider like how can we make this like make for a good story in the long term. And here's actually something interesting. Like I wish I got around to bring this up in my video, but here's one theory that I have for how they could theoretically really twist the knife in deeper with the accepting loss thing. Sephiroth knows that Aerith means a lot to the party, and the party really misses her. And if they had the opportunity to bring her back, they probably would do it. But, and I mentioned earlier, Genova could be the source of all this. Genova could be the source of the resurrection and the life stream powers and the timeline reset thing. Perhaps Sephiroth could taunt them by saying that, sure, you can theoretically, if you destroy Genova, like if you beat me and you destroy Genova and you save the planet, you will lose any opportunity you could possibly have of bringing her back. You will never be able to bring her back if you kill me and Genova. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They could
Yeah.
they could do something like that. That could work as like a minor side conflict just to really twist the knife in deeper.
Yeah, that's yeah. So I'm yeah. So that's just going back to the whole like there's so many possibilities, and it's like it just gives us time to. So I mean I'm a sucker for like theorizing and getting
Yeah.
into like, and I guess I'll bring this back to like I always keep bringing this back to like Rebuild, and
Yeah.
in Rebuild in Evangelion, like this entire thing, what you realize is besides all the symbolism and all the what does instrumentality really mean? How does it all work? What is the mechanics of the world? It doesn't make sense. It's fiction. It's not supposed to make sense. That was never the point. It's really just a coming of age story. It's about, growing up as a child, getting through depression, getting through that nihilism, and then coming out on the other side an adult, essentially.
Yeah.
That's kind of the arc of like Evangelion to Rebuild. And that's what it's always been about. And I think we were just talking about the time travel thing being just like it's not
a plot device to reinforce the
yeah,
human like struggles.
exactly.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like I can tolerate some plot holes in time travel stories because it's almost impossible to write a time travel story without creating a million plot holes. The best you can get is if you're doing the stable loop variation where nothing can be changed because your future self has already caused them to happen in the way that they did. So no matter your intentions, you'd only fulfill a looping sequence of events.
Yeah.
That to me is like the most plausible result of time travel, but it's the best you can get. But all time travel stories are going to have plot holes. So the thing that matters most is that you try not to draw attention to them. And this is, I think, a problem with Remake. Remake uses time travel as the basis for theory crafting. It encourages you to speculate about like what Sephiroth is doing, and that just draws attention to the plot holes. It raises questions like, if Sephiroth can time travel, why didn't he go back in time and kill Baby Cloud? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, you can, yeah. Hey, it's not perfect.
yeah, exactly. So the thing is that with any time travel story, the best you can do is try to steer the audience's attention away from it. There's a quote from the filmmaker Alexander McKendrick, I think it was his name. He said, "The director's job is to direct the attention of the audience," and like that. I think that sums it up well.
Okay.
The the best you can do is avoid drawing attention to the plot holes. And like, take for instance Star Wars. There's a huge plot hole in Star Wars, which is, why don't the Jedi and the Sith just use the Force to turn each other's lightsabers off? You know what I mean? Like,
Never thought about that. Yeah.
exactly. You
Yeah.
never thought about that. And the reason we never thought about it is because we never see the Force being used to do something as precise and minuscule as pushing a tiny button. Because we never see the Force used, like, we only ever see the Force being used to do things like very general, like lifting something like a rock in the air. And so as a result, the possibility of the Force being used to press a tiny button, it never crosses our minds. Therefore, you see what I'm getting at?
No, yeah. I totally get it. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, it's like the more you point attention to the time. But see, I might even push back on that because I don't think they really push the, because it's not clear. All we know is
True.
that it's kind of vague. It's like, I guess Sephiroth is like, it's not explicitly stated that Sephiroth is traveling through time. It's actually not well explained how
Yeah,
Sephiroth appeared in front of the party at the end of chapter 18. That
that's
part,
true.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
also not. So I don't know. So I guess it's kind of like we're in a wait and see. You know.
Exactly, I agree. And that's why in my video I wanted to focus mainly on like how Remake's story changes are executed now, and not speculate too much about the future. And that actually ties into like we talked earlier about the plate fall and the fact that nobody dies.
Mm-hmm.
That actually segues into a big problem with Remake. Like, part of the reason I'm so skeptical for the future is because I don't trust that any future character deaths will be permanent. And the reason why is because like because the writers have cried wolf like what, one, two, three, 8 times at this point. Like, I mean, think about it. Like, first there's Wedge's death fake out when the plate falls on him.
Yeah,
Seriously,
yeah.
how did he survive that? I mean, I was willing to ignore that on my first playthrough because, okay, this was stupid, but this is just one character that's been spared. Okay, fine, I'll overlook it. But then as the story goes on, you get more death fake outs. You get Barrett getting killed and then being brought back with life stream magic. And that's just like, wait, what? If life stream magic can resurrect the dead, then why couldn't they bring back Aerith and Dyne and everyone else in the original game?
They
Like,
weren't
you know what I mean?
important. They weren't important for the overall, right? Because the whole thing is the whispers are trying to keep the whispers are a metaphor for the bounds of the original story.
Yeah, it's yeah,
But I agree. Like I said, I think that was dumb with the Barrett thing. I honestly think they should have just found another way to get Barrett out of. I think it was really just like a weird contrivance to get Barrett out of unavailable. I feel
yeah.
like they should have just sent him somewhere else. I don't know.
They might as well have just put him on a bus for a few hours. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
yeah, like
yeah,
for
that
all
would
the
have been better.
difference that it makes.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
and
He's like,
then there
he could have been like, oh, I'm going for a bathroom break, guys. I'll be back or something.
Yeah, and then there was like Zack being brought back because the Whisper's defeat causes ripple effects back through time. And that's actually another thing with Remake. Part of the reason why the ending is so jarring is because there was never any indication anywhere in the entire FF7 compilation that altering past events was possible in Seven's world. The fact that you can go back in time and change things comes literally out of nowhere in the last chapter with no foreshadowing. I've seen people try to justify it by saying, like, the Time Guardian and the Temple of the Ancients, or like the lines in the original game where Sephiroth talks about like creating the future. But the fact is that it reminds me of, like, remember Palpatine's resurrection in Rise of Skywalker?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Chris Terrio, the writer, he tried to justify it by quoting that line from Revenge of the Sith, where Palpatine says that the dark side can save you from death because the dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. First of all, basing the entire conflict of your story on a very liberal interpretation of one line of dialogue is a terrible idea. Because one, it's not even foreshadowing, it's just a very obviously forced retcon. And second, everything else in the story contradicts it. Palpatine later said to Anakin that he actually was kind of bullshitting him. He doesn't know how to cheat death. It's a power only Darth Plagueis achieved. They have to work together to figure out the secret, which evidently they never did in the original trilogy. So it's just like everything that happened in Return of the Jedi was clearly intended to be the prophesied finale to the saga. No one ever watched Return of the Jedi or Revenge of the Sith and thought this talk of Sith magic means that Palpatine will come back from the dead later. And by the same metric, nobody ever played the original Final Fantasy VII and thought that Sephiroth's line about creating the future or the Time Guardian meant that it was possible to go back in time and change things. Yeah.
Yeah, I can agree with that. When Zach first when it was I thought it was cool to reference him at that point, even in chapter I think it's 17 they start to show.
18.
Is it 18? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. When they start showing, I'm like, because I hadn't seen any spoilers. I had no idea. It's
Yeah.
like you play, you're like, oh, okay, we're getting a reference. I was like, okay, I'm cool with the reference. And then it's like the whispers. I'm like, dang, he's not gonna. I was like, what is? Because yeah, it does start making you wonder, like, okay, what timeline is he in? A different timeline? Is he in the same timeline? Like, is it all connected? Is
Yeah,
like where is? Yeah.
and on a related note, another big plot hole, why did the Whispers show up for his death in the first place? I mean, the reason the Whispers showed up in the game is because Cloud has been hallucinating Sephiroth, and that has been causing butterfly effects that throw the timeline off course. But the thing is, during Zack's final stand, Cloud was a vegetable. He couldn't have been hallucinating anything, and Zack doesn't hallucinate. So Sephiroth could not have shown up there. And it's just like, what happened that threw the timeline off course that necessitated the Whispers showing up for Zack's final stand? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think I think Zach did not have to come back. I think I've changed. You've kind of changed my mind on this throughout this talk. I came in here with the idea that I like Zach because I personally I just want to
Yeah.
play with Zach in this game.
Yeah.
I just want to use him. So it's like that kind of like guilty pleasure. Just like I just want
Yeah.
to play with Zach.
Yeah, and
Um.
to be fair, Zach is actually is very popular in Japan because of Crisis Core's popularity among portable game players.
Yeah.
And theoretically, and I think Schrodinger's baby seal pointed this out. I think he mentioned that, like, in some ways, if Zach is present in Rebirth, that could theoretically make Aerith's death more impactful if it occurs. And it's just
Oh.
like, okay, that could work. That could work. And I think Maximilian Dude said the same thing in that Easy Allies podcast, I think. So yeah, that could theoretically work. But yeah, you can tell that Zach's scenes were kind of thrown in. I remember reading an interview where they said that originally the ending was just going to show the only thing that would change is that we saw that Big survived in the nursery. So Zach's scenes were kind of thrown in later, basically.
Yeah, I guess it just for me. I guess it just depends on what they do with Zach. I don't think they needed to bring him back to still have this kind of interesting time travel. Because bringing Zach back now brings in this weird, like, is there like an alternate timeline? Because we clearly don't run into Zach in this timeline. Is there two timelines? Is it all big one cycle? Because if it's all one circle and we get rid of Genova, does that mean that Zach now doesn't exist, or is there like it's like they're trying to do time travel in two different ways. They're trying to have it like both ways in a sense.
Yeah, and that's just the thing. Like, I this is something I addressed in my video. People are debating, is Final Fantasy VII Remake its own self-contained reimagining? Is it a sequel to the original game or not, or does it stand on its own? Like, are the time travel things self-contained? Does it overwrite the original game, or is it just overwriting its own self-contained history, like
Yeah.
not affecting the original game? Or is it an alternate universe to the original game, like where it's connected or not connected? Or is the remake trilogy overwriting the original game's timeline completely, replacing it? I honestly think it would be best if the developers just don't answer this at all. I think they really should just leave this up in the air forever, never answer it,
Mhm.
because no matter what they do, they're screwed. If the remake timeline is erasing or replacing the original game's timeline, that ruins the original game by saying it's now vestigial. And if it's an alternate universe, well, that ruins the remake trilogy because these aren't the characters that I know and love. They're just alternate universe knockoffs. And if if it's a self-contained continuity that has no connection to the original game, then that kind of that's going to disappoint some of the theory crafters who like the idea of it being connected. I honestly think they should leave this up in the air and let everyone else decide it for themselves.
Yeah, you might. Yeah, I think you're right on this. You changed my mind on this because I now the more I think about it, I think they could have done this without Zach. Like I feel like for me, I don't know if you've ever watched the Gurren Lagann the anime.
No, I haven't. Let me Google it. How do you spell it?
Gurren, so Gurren. So I got a little after this. We got a little sidetracked. But the whole point of bringing up Gurren Lagann was to make the, I guess, comparison to Kamina. So Kamina's death and Zack's death Zack's death in FF7 and Kamina's death in Gurren Lagann. They're very similar in how they serve to drive the protagonist's like inner motivations and yeah, I don't we never got back to this, but I believe in the same reason you wouldn't want to bring back Kamina, it's the same reason you don't want to bring back Zack. So, I mean, it's kind of a wait and see, and I think me and Hermit here, we kind of agree that bringing back Zack was unnecessary.
Okay,
Lagann, Lagann.
got it.
So it's like it's a mecha anime. It's kind of like Avon. It's like the optimistic version of Evangelion. If you know what Evangelion is, kind of like very nihilistic, very dark, very
Yeah, yeah. I
very
heard about how Ano had went into depression and
yeah
he struggled with like suicidal ideation and like Evangelion was like him kind of venting about that. And I
yeah
heard a lot about like the death threats that he got because I've heard that the scene in which one was it? Like the scene where Shinji wanks over Asuka.
yeah yeah
That
yeah
that scene was Ano Ano actually does not like, despite having some fan service in Evangelion, he actually doesn't really like overt sexualization in a lot of anime. So in a lot of ways, that scene was actually intended to spite the people who sexualize like underage characters,
mm-hmm.
sort of,
Yeah
like to portray them as creepy, sort of.
yeah
Yeah.
yeah 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 yeah. And EOE is like one big middle finger to all his haters back in like the late 90s who were like, "Oh, I hated the end of the original because the way they ended the original, it was a little vague. It was like kind of two episodes where it was more of like the characters are like kind of philosophizing about the what's happening, and then he's like, "Oh, that wasn't good enough for you? Here's the darkest ending you could ever imagine." And it starts off with like that scene. That's like pretty much like 15 minutes into the you're like, "Oh shit, this is what we're in for?" Oh god. Yeah, and if you thought the original Evangelion was dark, EOE end of Evangelion is like
Yeah.
like wow. It like it,
I think I yeah.
all
So
right.
Perfect Blue is yeah, I like it. I think it's really good. And I find it really interesting how it's a unintentional deconstruction of like the idol industry and all
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
Like you read my Twit longer post where I spoke about like my contempt for the idol industry. Like
I actually did not. I haven't. I did not get to that twit longer. Most of my analysis was on your Final Fantasy VII takes actually. So here, Hermit actually makes an argument I have never heard before, in regards to why killing off characters is important and why the lack of death in Final Fantasy VII Remake is kind of a bad thing. But I'm gonna save that for his video. I think he has a very unique perspective that actually convinced me to side with him on this point. But I'll save that for whenever he decides to drop that video. But it was a very interesting point. Uh, I guess the way to summarize it is more or less it is it's antithetical to the entire message of Final Fantasy VII, and I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it for him to like flesh that out. But it's a very convincing argument. But yeah, I guess subscribe to his channel and hopefully he'll drop it one of these days.
About the original FF7, its message about about life having value that cannot be reduced to a material utilitarian level. I think that message is kind of sacred, and I would hate to see it sacrificed just to appease people who can't handle it when their waifu dies. You know what I mean?
Yeah. See, there I would start to actually agree with you, like being purist to the at least the I guess the feel the not the feeling the intentions of the or the message of the original story, like
Yeah.
trying to at least stick to like you can like there's you still should have I think you should still have artistic freedom to do
Right.
things like I think time traveling can still work. I think you can still tell the same get the same I
Mhm.
guess message across, but you can I think I'm just open to creativity in that space. But yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with this argument you're making where it's like you cannot subvert like the theme and like the major theme of the original game just because it's so cheap. It's like
Yeah.
it's a desecration of the original story to a degree that's not acceptable. Like there's some things that shouldn't be messed with, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. Some things are sacred. Yeah, so I didn't want to talk about so much about the themes in my video because like we don't really know yet how these are going to be executed.
Yeah.
So maybe a few years from now, like depending on what they do, if I decide to play Rebirth, perhaps I'll make a follow-up video discussing how they handled the themes and why either they worked or they didn't work for me. We'll have to see. And I mentioned that earlier that one of the things that I plan on doing is I'm planning on waiting until the series is over, like and reading the spoilers before I play it. Part of the reason for that is because I find that the current narrative direction is a massive immersion breaker. Because the thing is, like I discussed this in my video, the concept of suspension of disbelief, right? Suspension of disbelief is when a story makes you forget that it's fictional. It creates the illusion that it's real even though you know that it isn't. So what that means is that stories can only retain our suspension of disbelief insofar as the things that happen in it feel justified in universe, and they break our immersion when you're reminded that a writer is controlling everything. And that's what I discussed in the video. Like, this is why plot twists need good foreshadowing. Like, if something is going to happen later in your story, you need to set it up early on because the degree to which audiences will tolerate something contrived is inversely proportional to how emotionally invested they are in the story. So the further you get into a story and the more emotionally invested you are, the less you will tolerate it when something happens that feels forced and reminds you of the author.
Mhm.
So uh, that's why plot twists need to be foreshadowed because they happen later in the story. So if you're going to do something contrived and like big later in the story, it needs to be foreshadowed early on. And Final Fantasy VII is a story that we're already deeply emotionally invested in. So I could accept them changing it if they worked the changes in more organically. But as I talk about in my video, a lot of the changes in Remake feel forced and not very well foreshadowed or integrated into the plot or the world. And so the result is that it's immersion breaking. When Remake deviates from the OG, it calls attention to the fact that it's a fictional story being controlled by a writer, and it pulls you out of the experience. And I don't like what they're doing with this, like this whole game of like the original Final Fantasy VII was an unreliable narrator story. Are Cloud and Sephiroth telling the truth? That was it. In Remake, the question is, are the writers telling us the truth or not? Can we trust what they are showing at face value? If a character dies, can we believe that the character will stay dead? Or can we not trust the writers to not bring them back later? So that's the thing. The entire narrative direction is a constant fourth wall break about how the developers are twisting it. So that's immersion breaking, and I'm not a fan of that. So
Okay.
that's part of the reason why I'm planning on spoiling it for myself anyway. It's because, like, I don't care. Like, plot twists are only worthwhile if they retain your immersion. The way that they're going about this is by its very nature
Yeah.
immersion breaking. So it's just like, you know what? If I spoil this for myself, I'm not going to lose anything because the odds are it wouldn't work for me anyway. I wouldn't feel immersed even if I went into it unspoiled because in the back of my mind, I would know the writers are manipulating everything very obviously.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's my approach. I'm going to like if I know what happens in the trilogy going forward, I can approach it on its own terms and I can set my expectations accordingly and I can finally get immersed in the story without being constantly tormented by the question of
Mm.
what are the writers going to pull out of thin air next.
Yeah. Yeah, you make a good point there. I can understand that. It is by like yeah, there's no getting around that. I think I'm not sure if Maximilian or I don't know if how much people talk about this like breaking of the fourth wall and like it is immersion breaking. I will agree. It does I am very aware, right? Cuz all of this does rely on you knowing this is all a remake. Like because this isn't designed for like new fans per se.
Right.
Yeah, they don't do enough like build up. A lot of stuff doesn't make sense unless you know the original story.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I don't think people say that the whispers are meant to represent fans who don't want the story changed. I don't think that was entirely the intent. I think rather the whispers are intended to represent the developers' anxieties, sort of, or whatever.
hmm,
I don't think the developers intended it to spite the fans because, I mean, that's a really bad idea. Like, first of all, the developers had no way of knowing that 75% of people, the majority, were going to like this game, sort of like
hmm,
that's not a good like if you're planning on telling a trilogy and you need as many people to stay around as possible, then telling your fans to go fuck themselves is a terrible idea. So
hmm.
I don't think this was intentional. I don't think like I used to think it was. Like I used to think that this was that the whole game was just a sadistic prank to spite people who got in the way of the artists in artistic freedom. But I don't think that was actually the intent. I think that was intentional. I think it's just that the developers thought it would be a cool idea that Sephiroth is trying to throw things off course and the Whispers are trying to correct it. And also because they needed an excuse to have a final boss rush at the end, like with the like
Yeah, I could see where it's a little. It feels it's like a little contrived. Because I actually I think I saw another video where or I think maybe it was even in your video. You put an example of someone talking about it feels like the whispers were just kind of thrown in there. I forgot
yeah.
what part of the video it is, but I think
It was in section 6.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You might have a point. I don't know. I like the idea of the maybe it's I don't know. Maybe I'm being a little bit optimistic. I'm seeing it with like rose tinted glasses. I'm trying because I love the battle system and the music and everything and the spectacle.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm kind of like just trying to like justify.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a little bit of justification on, but that is another point I will concede. I'll actually concede that it does.
The party doesn't have a good enough reason to fight Destiny at the end. That's something I ranted about in my video. The
Mhm.
best explanation that I've heard is that they fight Destiny because Sephiroth is immune to the Whispers, but they aren't. So they need to get the Whispers out of the way in order to stop Sephiroth because the Whispers will not be able to stop Sephiroth on their own. If that's the explanation,
Mhm.
that might make sense, but it's not well communicated in the game, and I didn't realize it until just a month ago, actually. Like that's why I didn't bring it up in my video.
Yeah.
But as it currently stands, it's just like, why do they fight the Whispers? It feels so illogical. You
Though
know?
I mean, it is kind. Doesn't Aerith at the end is kind of like we need to do this. Like so, I
Yeah,
think a lot of this hinges on like Aerith, something that's not being shared with the audience. Like there's Aerith knows something that we don't, which
yeah,
to me actually kind of heightens the drama a little bit. But I will
yeah,
still I will still agree that the whispers are kind of they're very contrived. It's not
yeah,
explained well. It does feel like it's yeah,
yeah,
final boss rush kind of thing.
yeah. The boss rush kind of falls flat because you don't really understand why it's so important that you fight them. You're just kind of going off of a hunch that Aerith gives, and that
Mhm.
just it makes the fight less than it could be. I think that's part of the reason why the fight is so frustrating. It gives off the feeling that the developers are having way more fun with it than I, as the player, am, sort of.
Yeah.
And that's the that it's really yeah, it's unfortunate because the what was it with the way Aerith was speaking, and like the thing is, like, the Whispers are trying to stop Sephiroth from destroying the planet, and it's just like, and they say they need to stop Sephiroth, so why fight the Whispers? Sort of. If like Aerith was telling me to do that, I'd be asking a lot more questions. Like I'm a religious person in real life. Like I was raised Protestant and I'm practicing Coptic Orthodoxy. If I was in a situation where Jesus told me that I have to uh, fight like heaven's angels in order to stop Satan, I would be like, wait a minute, what? Like, can you help explain that to me? How that makes sense? And the only acceptable explanation, like even with Jesus, I would still want an explanation for how it fits together. Sort of, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's. I want to. Do you? I'm gonna ask you this. Do you think that they have the end written, like they wrote the end of the story? Do you think they have the end in mind? Like when they conceived Remake, do you think they built Remake as just like we'll see how it does and then maybe we'll write the end as we go? Or do you think they had the end in mind? Like
I don't know, but I sincerely hope that they have an ending planned out in advance,
okay.
because that's the best way to tell stories. Like, one of my biggest fears, and I wish I addressed this in the video, but I didn't get around to it because it didn't occur to me until later in the editing when I couldn't figure out how else to work it in. But one of my biggest fears is that they are trying to write around every fan theory so that nobody figures out the thing ahead of time. And like Westworld tried doing this in its second season, and the second season was a total mess.
Yeah.
The last 3 seasons of Game of Thrones did this, and well, the writers said that they prioritized shocking people who were expecting things. Like they didn't care about like, and that's a really bad way to write stories. And the reason why is because, like, as I've said earlier, stories work best when they're planned out from the beginning. And part of the reason for that is because if something is going to happen later in your story, as I said earlier, it needs to be set up early on. If you're going to have a twist, it needs to be foreshadowed. But this means that if you're telling a multi-part story, someone on the internet is going to figure out your story no matter what you do. Someone is going to figure out all the clues. A bunch of theory crafters are going to figure out your story ahead of time.
Yeah.
The fact is, you have to foreshadow your twists and later story events in order for them to work. They need to be developed over time. But fan theorists are going to figure it out anyway. So if you make it your goal to outsmart the internet, you are going to be forced to abandon everything that you've already set up, and you're going to have to make up new contrivances and payoffs on the fly with no buildup. And the result is that you're going to have a disappointing mess of a narrative where nothing you set up goes anywhere, and everything that you end up doing ends up feeling forced and out of nowhere, breaking the audience's immersion and ruining the story. Don't try to outsmart the internet. Let the fan theorists speculate. If that ruins the surprise for them, that's their loss. They were the ones who went through all the trouble of spoiling it for themselves by figuring everything out. And in fact, going to be disappointed. They're not there just to feel surprised. They just like speculating and feeling like detectives and reading through it. So trying to outsmart them, that's a lose-lose for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it does. A lot of this does like it hinges on Aerith. Because the way they wrote it, it hinges on Aerith kind of knowing how this all is ending, which is why we have to kill the Whisperers.
Yeah.
Because somehow, if we don't, this time around, Sephiroth wins forever for something. Like for some,
Yeah.
like that part. So that's why now the more we talk about it, I'm like, did they even write the like do they know how this is supposed to end? Because that's not well explained. But
I
yeah,
hope so.
yeah, I hope so. Yeah. So I'm optimistic though. I'm still optimistic. I do think about this more than I did before. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
lie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and to some extent, I actually do kind of envy your optimism. I wish I could like get on board with it.
Mm.
But the thing is that the first part of Remake really hurt me really bad. Like, it left me kind of devastated for days, like, because all the bad impressions hit me all at once. and that's another reason the video took me so long to make. It's because it took me forever to disentangle all the mixed reactions and finally figure out how best to word it.
Wait, in the first half? You mean when you first see Sephiroth? Because that's what I would think is the first part. Because I mean, the rest of it more or less follows the story. It's a little.
The ending of Remake, like
Are you
part
talking about the
3.
first part of the ending of Remake? Because you said the first half.
Yeah, I may have misspoken there.
Oh,
Sorry
okay,
about that. Yeah,
gotcha,
so
gotcha.
the ending of Remake, like chapter 18, really left a really bad impression on me. So, and I don't really want to risk like being hurt like that again. And also, like I mentioned, that Final Fantasy sequels are basically infamous for invalidating the stories of their predecessors. Like Remake right now seems to be backpedaling on the things that made the original game so impactful.
Yeah.
And if Rebirth goes in the opposite direction, if Rebirth doubles down on the themes of the original game, like the loss and everything, it'll render the last chapter of Remake pointless, which, okay, I guess that's not really that much of a loss to be all things considered. But even then, if Rebirth does that, there's a possibility that part 3 will just go back on that. Like part 3 will just resurrect everyone for a happy ending. It's like experience has taught me that there's really no point in getting invested in anything that Creative Business Unit 1 writes, because there's a very good chance that they'll just invalidate it later. This seems to be a running problem with their sequels. Like I mentioned earlier, like 10-2 undermines the ending of 10. Chrono Cross ruins a lot of Chrono Trigger. Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance renders so much of what happened throughout the series pointless. And oh my god, like the end Final Fantasy 13 too. Oh my god, absolutely fucking nothing that happened in that game mattered. It was all rendered pointless by the ending, and then the ending was just invalidated by Lightning Returns. So it's just like, yeah, I'm going to wait until this is over and verify that the story actually matters, because I don't want to risk wasting more time and money on a story that might not even matter in the end. Know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I said, I'm optimistic, but yeah, there like but you've definitely changed. I'm not even just saying, you definitely have changed my mind on a few things actually. Just having this conversation, and I think I'm surprised I haven't seen more of this kind of like back and forth between, like, on one side, I wouldn't even say I wouldn't call you a hater. That's not even a critique.
Thank
like,
you.
yeah, no, you're definitely. You're like, I guess I haven't seen because it's clearly a debate online. You see it on Twitter,
Yeah.
you see it in Reddit, you see it on the YouTube videos, but I haven't seen two people kind of just come together and just like talk it out. And that's kind of why I wanted to do this. And you, Hermit, Jonah, Hermit, we'll just say Hermit. I'll edit.
Yeah.
Hermit, it's been nice talking to you. Let's keep in touch.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you. Yeah. Take care.
So that was the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed that very long discussion for all 3 of you who stayed for the entire thing. Hopefully it's more, but that was it. I'm grateful to have Hermit, Obsessive Hermit, on this podcast. I guess you could call it a podcast at this point. Looking forward to future discussions, especially after Rebirth. We'll probably revisit this after he's played Rebirth on the PC whenever it comes out. Maybe, hopefully by summertime, or hopefully by the end of the year, we can revisit this discussion. So again, thank you to Obsessive Hermit for coming on the podcast. This was really a discussion, but it ended up being like a podcast. But I'll be releasing this, when you see this, it'll be the day after Rebirth has been released. So this will mark the final discussion on Remake, hopefully the final one, the last one that anyone will have about Remake, just Remake. Future discussions will be all focused on Rebirth and what happened. So until then, until the next video, next podcast, video essay, who knows what I'm going to be making next. It'll be probably focused on Rebirth content or another interview with another creator. Until then, peace out.
Till the day that we meet Please, I'm begging you, lend me your strength.